Hey guys, tonight, we slip into the parts of the medieval city that were never shown in the colorful manuscript margins. The cramped back alleys that smell like yesterday's stew and last week's rain, where cats slink like they own the place, and the cobbles remember every boot that's hurried over them. You're here for the business of secrets, the kind of work that can keep a king on his throne or dump him in a ditch, and you probably won't survive this. Sorry, that's just the statistical reality. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Are you hiding in the quiet of midnight or catching this in the warm sprawl of afternoon? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You tug your hood lower. Not because it hides much, everyone in this part of the city wears one, but because it gives you the comforting illusion of being less visible. The street curves ahead, narrowing until the walls are close enough that if you stretched out your arms, your fingertips would scrape flaking plaster. From an upper window, someone empties a bucket of gray water into the gutter, and it hurries past your boots like it has somewhere urgent to be. The meeting spot is a cracked stone bench tucked under a jutting timber. From here you can see 3 exits and the little archway that leads back into the market. You sit like you're waiting for a friend you're not sure will come, which is exactly what you're doing. A rat noses near your boot, then darts off wise enough to know when a bigger predator has arrived. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval cities were tight webs of streets with certain alleys and lanes unofficially claimed by trades guilds or even less respectable professions. These shadowed routes made perfect cover for passing messages, avoiding tax collectors, or vanishing from a tale. Narrow medieval design wasn't just an accident of poor planning. It could be both a shield and a trap. Quirky tidbit, some alleys had nicknames so well known that they made it onto official records like Cat's Belly in Paris or Hell's Kitchen in York, often hinting at the kind of business done there. Historians still argue whether such names were warnings or advertisements. In your case tonight, they feel like both. A figure approaches from the market side, moving like they're just another buyer who forgot their onions. You don't stand no sudden movements, but you adjust your cloak so the small pouch tied inside hangs where a casual bump could look like an accident. They drop onto the bench beside you, too close for strangers, too polite for friends. Long walk, they murmur in the way that's neither question nor statement, and you nod just once. Their hand rests briefly on the stone, and when it lifts, there's a folded scrap left behind, held in place by a small pebble. You keep your gaze on the alley mouth, but your fingers curl around the note and slide it into your sleeve. It's lighter than you expected. One thin slip of parchment, maybe 2 words, maybe your next month of work. From the upper street, a bell tolls 2 deep notes. You and your contact stand in unison, but turn in opposite directions, vanishing into the weave of lanes. You walk with the crowd until you can duck into the covered passage behind a tanner's shop, the air sharp with hides and lye. Here you open the note. One word, listen. It's a warning or an order, possibly both. Somewhere beyond the tanner's vats, the city keeps breathing market chatter, a hammer's rhythm, the splash of water on stone. Somewhere in it is the thing you're supposed to hear. Your ears adjust to the rhythm of the street until the smallest things stand out. The scrape of a boot heel that's matched your pace for 3 turns, the faint hiss of whispering in a tongue. You half know the metallic chime of a scale weighing more than grain. You start walking again, slower now, counting heartbeats. The sound is there, someone shadowing you, careful enough to think they're not being noticed. You smile to yourself, though it's the kind of smile no one else would call friendly. The alleys close in again just as you planned. Joke 1, you hope your follower isn't lost, because there's nothing sadder than a spy who needs directions. You pass beneath a timber arch brush against a hanging bundle of drying herbs and step into a courtyard where 3 exits look like choices, but only one doesn't end in a wall. You take the wrong one on purpose. Footsteps follow. Here the air smells of mildew and baked bread, a combination only medieval cities could pull off without shame. You stop beside a barrel, pretend to inspect it, and wait for the steps to catch up. The shadow that appears at your side is taller than you guessed, wrapped in a cloak that hides everything but the eyes. Eyes that flick down to your boots, then up to your hood, then away again like they've decided you're not worth knowing. Listen. They murmur the same word from your note, and you realize this isn't your pursuer at all. It's your next lead wearing someone else's footsteps to get close. Joke 2, apparently in spy work, everyone is both following and being followed, and it's exhausting for the cobblestones. They tell you quickly, softly, that you'll find your real contact in the candlemaker's loft by dusk. That the city watch is sniffing around the east gate, and that your name came up in a conversation you weren't supposed to be in. Before you can answer, they melt away into the alley's damp light, leaving you with nothing but the smell of rosemary and a mind full of ticking clocks. Joke 3, you briefly consider retiring to a quieter job like lion taming. You step back into the street cloak, hiding the tension in your shoulders. The day still looks ordinary to everyone else, but you can feel the map of shadows under it, a second city, where every corner might have your name on it. The tavern you choose looks like every other one on the lane. 2 crooked stories, plaster flaking to show the timber frame beneath a signboard, painted with something that might once have been a goat, but now looks more like a weary dog. The door creaks in that suspiciously rehearsed way tavern doors have, alerting everyone inside to your arrival. It smells of beer onions and the particular dampness that comes from centuries of spilled ale soaking into floorboards. The noise inside is polite chaos, dice clattering on a back table, a lute being tuned badly in the corner, someone laughing like they just won the crown. You walk in with your hood low, not because you're hiding, but because it helps you pretend you belong to the quieter corners of the room. You pick a seat along the wall, half-shadowed with a clear view of both the hearth and the door. This isn't paranoia, it's training. Or at least that's what you tell yourself when you realize you've been counting the patrons since you sat down. Mainstream historical fact taverns in medieval towns weren't just for drinking. They were central hubs for trade gossip, hiring, and in some cases, clandestine dealings. Foreign merchants and local regulars rubbed elbows here, making them perfect places for spies to blend in or listen unnoticed. City records often mention watchmen being ordered to keep an eye on taverns of ill repute, which in some districts was most of them. Quirky tidbit. Some taverns had secret menus of sorts, not just food or drink, but services like discreet message passing, hidden backroom meetings, or accidentally delivering the wrong ale to the wrong table so coded phrases could be exchanged. Historians still argue whether these menus were formalized agreements or just clever improvisations by opportunistic innkeepers. Your ale arrives before you've ordered it, which means someone already knows why you're here. The serving girl sets it down with a glance toward the far corner where a man in a faded green tunic sits alone working at a loaf of bread like it owes him money. You take a slow sip, pretending not to notice him. Eventually, you rise mug in hand and drift toward his table like you're seeking better heat from the hearth. He doesn't look up until you're close enough to smell the bread's warm crust. Long walk, he says the same phrase from yesterday's alley, which means he's either your contact or someone playing a very dangerous game. You sit without asking, tear off a piece of bread and chew slowly. Around you, the tavern hum keeps going, the lute player finding something almost like a tune. He leans in just enough for his words to reach you over the din. "Job simple," he says. "Letter to the east gate before second bell. Not in your hand, not in your voice." You don't touch the folded paper he slides toward you, you just rest your hand near it. "And if I'm stopped, then you never saw me." Joke 1 medieval spy work is basically just the world's worst pen pal club. You ask who the letter's for, and he shakes his head, tearing another strip from the loaf. Safer if you don't know. But if it doesn't get there, well, safer for no one. You let the words settle in the space between you in the way breadcrumbs settle into a table's grooves. Finally, you palm the letter and slip it into your cloak, lining the wax seal, pressing cool against your ribs. From the bar, the innkeeper starts up a story about a fisherman who swore the river had eyes, and the laughter that follows hides your exit. Outside the lane smells of smoke and frost, and the bell tower looms over the rooftops, marking time you wish you could bargain with. You take the longer route toward the gate, looping through market streets, where vendors call out their wares in voices that could sell anything, from turnips to treason. A woman selling cloth lets her bolt fall just as you pass, blocking the narrow way for a moment. She apologizes in a voice too smooth to be real, and in that pause you spot a pair of watchmen turning into the street ahead. You duck into a side alley, the letter suddenly heavy. The alley narrows walls, leaning like old conspirators, and you pass a shuttered window where whispers leak into the cold air. The words are too low to catch, but the tone is urgent. At the next turn, you almost collide with a boy carrying a basket of eggs. He looks at you with wide eyes, then glances at your cloak lining. You don't ask how he knows it's safer not to, but you drop a copper into his palm, and he scampers off down a different street. Joke 2, apparently in this city, even the chickens have an intelligence network. You slip out near the east wall, the gate just ahead. The watchmen are there, scanning faces like they're reading a book for familiar words. You slow your pace, adjust your hood, and join a group of merchants waiting to pass. The man in front of you complains loudly about grain tariffs, drawing the watchman's attention just long enough for you to step through the gate and into the clear. Once you're beyond sight, you duck behind a cart and hand the letter to a woman with a basket of dried fish. She takes it without a word, tucks it under the fish as if it's always belonged there, and walks away. Your breath fogs in the air, mixing with the wood smoke curling from the gatehouse chimney. You turn back toward the city, the green tunic man's instructions complete for now. Joke 3, you'd like to imagine you're done for the day, but you know better spies get days off only when they're dead or fictional. As you re-enter the lanes, you pass the tavern again. Through its window, the lute player is still at it, still chasing that elusive tune. You smile not because it's good music, but because it's proof the city keeps its own rhythm no matter who's carrying the beat. You're not 2 streets from the tavern before the letter you just delivered turns into a new problem. A boy different from the egg carrier falls into step beside you, chewing on something that might be an apple or might be yesterday's bread pretending to be one. He doesn't look at you when he speaks. Got a message, he says, like it's just the weather. From the weaver's wife. It's a shirt needs mending. Red thread in the collar means hurry. You don't have to think long. Red thread in the collar is an old signal you learned weeks ago. The safe house wants to meet, and they have something they can't say out loud. You drop a copper into the boy's palm and watch him vanish down the next lane, feet barely touching the cobbles. The weaver's shop sits at the edge of the cloth market. Its shutters open to the winter air so bolts of wool can catch what light there is. The weaver's wife greets you like a regular, guiding you toward the back, where the looms clack in their steady rhythm. She hands you a folded shirt, plain linen, but the collar bears a neat line of tiny red stitches. Inside it, you feel the bump of something hard. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval spies often relied on mundane trades to mask their operations. Tailors, weavers, and cobblers could pass hidden notes or small items without drawing suspicion, since their goods naturally traveled across social boundaries. A shirt could go from a noble's household to a market stall without anyone asking why. Quirky tidbit: in some regions, tailors stitched blessing knots or secret charms into clothing hems, supposedly to protect the wearer. Historians still argue whether this was genuine superstition or a convenient cover for concealing spy codes in the stitching itself. You tuck the shirt under your arm and leave, heading for the candlemaker's loft, as the contact from yesterday's alley instructed. The streets between here and there are busy enough to hide you, but you still feel the prickle of eyes on your back. The candlemaker's shop is all beeswax and tallow, the air warm and faintly sweet. He barely glances up as you enter, pointing toward the ladder at the rear. Upstairs, the loft is low-ceilinged, the beams thick with years of smoke. Your contact waits there, a wiry man with ink stains on his fingers and a look that says sleep is a luxury he can't afford. You hand him the shirt. He doesn't look at it, just rips the collar seam with a practiced flick of his thumb. From inside falls a strip of parchment no wider than a ribbon covered in minuscule writing. "Good," he mutters, scanning it. "Names, dates, gate rotations. Worth a week's bread if we're fast." He pulls a small pouch from his belt and drops it into your hand. The coins inside clink softly, each one another reason to keep going, or another chance to stop. Joke 1: if you keep accepting payment in coin, you're going to need a second cloak just to carry your wages and your paranoia. The man pours you a cup of weak ale and gestures to a stool. "They'll want a reply by dusk," he says, "and you'll need to carry it yourself. No shirt tricks this time." You ask why, and he tilts the parchment toward you. One of the names makes your stomach tighten. It's someone from your own quarter, someone who would know your face in the dark. You spend the next hour helping him prepare the reply. Instead of ink, he uses a needle to prick tiny holes above certain letters in a religious text, the pattern spelling out the message. To anyone else, it's just another devotional book. To the right reader, it's treason. Mainstream historical fact. This book's cipher method was used for centuries, marking or underlining letters in an agreed-upon text to spell hidden words. The trick was choosing a book common enough not to arouse suspicion, but specific enough that both parties had the exact same edition. Quirky tidbit: some ciphers were so elaborate that they required matching burn marks or folds in the page, leading to awkward situations if a bookbinder fixed the copy without knowing its secret use. Historians still argue whether certain heavily marked medieval psalters were devotional tools or covert codebooks. Once the book is ready, you wrap it in cloth and tie it to the bottom of your satchel. The candlemaker gives you one last piece of advice. If they ask, you're delivering it to a scribe for rebinding. If they press, say it's for a wedding gift. If they take it well, walk home slowly and watch the roofs. Joke 2: medieval instructions for danger always sound like the setup to a bad tavern story. You leave the loft with the weight of beeswax on your clothes and the book against your hip. The streets have thinned as the day moves toward evening, shadows growing long between the buildings. You take a detour through the spice market, letting the strong scents of cinnamon and pepper mask your trail. Halfway through the market, you catch the reflection of movement in a polished copper basin, someone slipping between stalls, keeping pace with you. You adjust your path toward a cart, piled high with wool sacks, duck behind it, and emerge on a different street. Joke 3 in your head: you thank the wool merchant for providing medieval camouflage free of charge. By the time you reach the meeting point, a small archway near the city wall, you're certain you've lost your tail. You hand the book to a man pretending to mend a harness. He doesn't look at it, just tucks it under his tools and nods. "Same time tomorrow," he says like it's an appointment for bread, not espionage. As you walk back, the bells begin their evening call, the sound rolling through the streets like a tide. Somewhere in the city, someone is already reading the names you helped carry, deciding who will live in shadow and who won't live at all. The moon isn't up yet, but the sky has taken on that thin blue that makes every shadow seem sharper. You've barely stepped out of your door before a runner older than the street boys who usually carry messages catches your sleeve. His breath is visible in the chill air, but his voice is steady. "Moonlight job," he says. "Tonight." You know what that means. A delivery that can't wait for daylight either, because the news will spoil by dawn, or because someone wants fewer witnesses. You pull your hood up and follow him, boots scuffing over cobbles, worn smooth by centuries of other errands. Mainstream historical fact: in medieval cities, important messages often traveled by trusted couriers at night. While more dangerous, the cover of darkness reduced the risk of interception in crowded streets and gave spies like you an excuse to avoid daytime scrutiny from market gossips and watch patrols. Quirky tidbit: some towns posted an official night bell at curfew, after which only watchmen, night workers, or those with special passes could be on the streets legally. Historians still argue whether spies preferred to move before or after curfew. Before meant more people to blend in with, after meant fewer eyes but more suspicion from patrols. Your guide leads you to the stables near the south gate. The horse waiting for you is lean with the impatient shuffle of an animal that wants the job done. A saddlebags holds a single oilskin wrapped packet. It's heavier than you expect, flat but weighted at one end, like there's metal inside. You mount up without questions. The stable master, who smells faintly of hay and lamp oil, steps close enough for you to see the pale scar along his jaw. "Gate guards have been told you're carrying church accounts," he says. "If they check, show them the outer seal. Don't let anyone see the inside one. Joke one in your line of work: seals are like onions, best left unpeeled." The gate passes without trouble, the guards more interested in their own conversation than your errand. Outside, the road stretches under a strip of dimming sky, flanked by hedges and the dark shapes of winter fields. You keep your pace steady. Too fast attracts attention. Too slow invites company. An hour out, the road dips near a copse of bare trees. You hear it before you see it, the soft thud of hooves not matching yours. Whoever's behind you isn't trying to pass. You urge your horse forward, veering into a narrower track you know from market day shortcuts. Branches whip at your cloak, the air turning colder in the close space. When you glance back, there's no rider, just the faint shape of something moving among the trunks. You push on until the track widens again, then slow to listen. Silence except for your own horse's breath. At the river crossing, you dismount, leading the horse across the wooden planks, slick with frost. The packet shifts in the saddlebag, the weight of it pulling at your curiosity. You resist opening it. Here would be like lighting a beacon. On the far bank, a small chapel sits dark against the slope. You knock 3 times at the back door, then once more after a pause. A hooded figure answers, ushering you inside, where the air smells of beeswax and cold stone. They take the packet, fingers lingering on the second seal. "Good," they say, and slide it under the altar cloth. The roads are worse than the letters make them seem. You sip the watered wine they offer, letting your hands thaw against the cup. The hooded figure warns you not to linger. There's a watch patrol rumored to be combing the roads before dawn. Mainstream historical fact: churches and chapels often served as meeting points for clandestine exchanges, partly because of their neutral ground status, and partly because they were among the few places open to all social classes. Quirky tidbit: some clergy maintained private cipher systems for their own correspondence, often adapted from monastic shorthand. Historians still argue whether certain cryptic marginal notes in medieval missals were pious commentary or coded political messages. You leave the chapel by a side door mounting up in the shadow of its wall. The moon has risen now, silvering the frost on the road ahead. Halfway back, you spot movement near the hedgerow, a glint of metal, maybe a helm, maybe a trap. You steer off the main path into a rutted lane, trusting your horse's sure footing. Whoever's waiting doesn't follow. Joke 2, maybe they saw your horse's attitude and decided it wasn't worth the trouble. The city gate is shut when you return as expected after curfew. You use the narrow postern showing the guard your writ with the wax seal still intact. He yawns, waves you through, and you're back inside the labyrinth of sleeping streets. As you stable the horse, the stable master glances at you, once then goes back to his work. No questions, no remarks, just the silent understanding of someone who knows that some jobs are finished the moment you return, and others begin then. Joke 3. You wonder if he has a stable full of horses with better stories than yours. You walk home under the moon boots, echoing in alleys where only the night watch's lantern sways. In your pocket, a few coins from the chapel clink together, a sound both reassuring and dangerous, depending on who hears it. By the time you reach your door, the moonlight has softened, the frost glistens, and the city is deep in the kind of quiet that remembers everything said in whispers. By the time you've shaken the night air from your cloak, the next summons finds you not on the street, but through a tap at your shutters. It's a rhythm you've learned, too short, one long pause, one more. Disguises tonight then. You open the shutter a crack, and a hand slips in a bundle of cloth tied with string. The bundle smells faintly of lamp black and wool grease. You unroll it on the table. Inside, a patched jerkin, a cap with the brim torn just enough to change your face's outline, and a ragged scarf the color of ditch water. In the lamplight, it's not much, but with the right slouch and a change in your walk, you'll vanish into the kind of background people forget mid-blink. Mainstream historical fact, medieval disguises didn't mean elaborate costumes. Often they relied on small, plausible changes. Clothing from a different trade smudged dirt to alter skin tone or altering a hairstyle. Sumptuary laws, which dictated what people could wear based on status, could be bent just enough to pass for another class if you were careful. Quirky tidbit, some spies carried small pouches of scented herbs or animal fat to mask their usual smell, useful in a world where your scent could identify your trade. Historians still argue whether this trick was more common among urban spies or those working in rural courts, where everyone knew everyone else's habits. You change quickly, binding your hair with a strip of cloth and smearing a little soot across your jaw. In the small piece of polished bronze you keep as a mirror, you already look less like yourself, more like a tired dock worker with bad luck in caps. The instructions in the bundle are simple. Find the merchant with the green tally stick. He knows nothing about you, but you know what to do. Joke 1, medieval instructions rarely come with the comfort of no pressure. The tally stick, you know, will be the key. Merchants used them to keep accounts, splitting them lengthwise. So each party held a matching half. This one, if the signal's right, will be cut from green-stained wood, the mark of a shipment that never existed. You head toward the riverfront, where the smell of fish mingles with the smoke from warehouse chimneys. The wharf is busy even in the dim morning light, barges unloading sacks, carters shouting for space gulls, screaming like unpaid debt collectors. You spot him near a stack of barrels, a stocky man in a russet tunic, the tally stick sticking out of his belt. You approach from the side, keeping your gait slow, like someone more interested in warming their hands than in business. When you're close enough, you drop the agreed phrase, "You'll want the narrow rope. Thicker ones rot quicker." He glances at you, eyes narrowing, then hands you a small bundle wrapped in coarse cloth. You walk away before you open it. Down a side alley behind the cooper's yard, you untie the cloth to reveal a small box painted with a crude image of a hare. Inside, 3 wax tablets, each covered in faint scratches. Mainstream historical fact wax tablets were a common reusable writing surface, but in espionage, they could be scratched lightly, almost invisible, until rubbed with ash or soot to reveal the writing. Quirky tidbit, some messages were written on warm wax so that they'd fade as the wax cooled, leaving no visible mark unless reheated. Historians still argue whether such heat-fade messages were widespread or just a clever gimmick used in a few courts. You slip the tablets into your pouch, noting that the hare motif is itself a signal. Hares in medieval iconography could mean swiftness, cowardice, or even subversion, depending on the artist. Tonight, it means you have less time than you thought. You make for the chandler's shop on Bread Lane, the safest place to prepare the soot mixture. In the back by the window, where smoke stains the wall, you warm the tablets just enough to soften the wax, then rub them with a pinch of ash. The words emerge like ghosts, lists of cargo, some real, some invented, and 2 names you don't recognize, but they're marked with a tiny cross beside each. You know better than to keep the tablets after reading. You scrape the wax smooth again, leaving them looking like they've never been used, then return them to the box. Joke 2, medieval spycraft, is basically spring cleaning for information. Tidy up after yourself or else. On your way to return them, you pass the same merchant still at the wharf. You drop the box onto the top barrel in his stack without breaking stride, letting the tide of workers carry you past. From the next corner, you see him pick it up, glance around once, and slip it under his arm. Transaction complete. As you melt back into the riverfront crowd, you realize your disguise is doing its job too well. A carter nearly knocks you over, muttering about useless dock hands. You mutter back in character and keep moving. The bundle's clothes will go back to whoever sent them, washed and folded like any other laundry. By tomorrow, you'll be back in your usual hood and cloak. But tonight, you're just another forgettable shadow on the wharf. Joke 3. It's almost disappointing when nobody tries to follow you. You've started to miss the attention. When you finally reach your street, you pass a beggar who gives you the smallest nod, a signal you've used before. It means message received, payment later. You nod back, slip into your door, and set the soot-stained rag to soak. The city outside hums with its usual noise, but you can feel the quiet seam underneath, the one that runs from dock to tavern to loft, stitching together all the people who will never be in the same room but know the same secret. You spend the morning turning yourself into furniture. That's the trick with market work. Become a stall, and people will talk like you're made of wood and patience. You borrow a barrow, stack it with 3 wicker baskets, 2 full of bright apples, 1 with pears, pretending not to bruise, and set a rough cloth awning that flaps just enough to make your patch look honest. A chalked price board leans against the leg, fair numbers, believable smudges. You tuck a sprig of mint near the scale, not for scent this time, though that helps, but because everyone in this town has decided mint means you're harmless. If only. You settle into the rhythm that isn't quite selling so much as listening, wearing a fruit costume. The square wakes in layers, the thud of barrels near the coopers, the hiss of an iron ladle dipping stew at the cookshop, the cantor's test note from the church porch, like a sparrow clearing its throat. The bell marks the hour, and conversations fall into place as predictably as geese landing. A woman in saffron wool argues bread prices with a baker who holds his peel like a scepter. A clerk in indigo trades laments about wax costs with a chandler. Somewhere behind you, a lute tries to knit a tune and drops a stitch. All of it is signal. None of it looks like it. You keep your hands busy with apple polishing because idle hands invite questions. The trick is to watch without staring and to hear without making your face do the thing faces do when something interesting happens. You weigh a man's purchase 4 apples, 1 free for his child, if he promises not to throw it. And you keep the scale slightly wobbly, just enough that people feel compelled to stand and wait while you tap the balance back to honest. Waiting people talk. Mainstream historical fact: medieval markets were the city's circulatory system, regulated by assizes that fixed the price and quality of bread and ale, patrolled by officials who checked weights and measures, and lined by stalls that sometimes passed from family to family, like reliable old shoes. Spies and informants thrived in these hubs because strangers could belong here for a day without drawing a map of questions on themselves. Quirky tidbit: the word eavesdrop comes from standing under a house's eaves to catch what dripped not water, but talk through the open shutters. Market stalls borrowed the technique under canvas eaves, where you could be rainproof and rumor-rich at once. Historians still argue whether market hucksters were consciously recruited as listening posts, or if their recruitment was just the inevitable outcome of people who already knew everything before breakfast. Your first useful thread arrives tied to a fish. A pair of carters argue over a wagon's axle in front of your stall, which would be annoying if they weren't also recounting yesterday's watch rota at the East Gate. New names, a mention of a cousin who drinks when he shouldn't, and the fact that the Reeves nephew insists on wearing the feathered hat, even on duty. You slide a small discount across the baskets toward the carter, who speaks softer. He notices, and his tongue gets looser. You've bought worse information for more. 2 boys race past, slapping your price board and nearly upending the pears. You steady the stack with the reflex of someone who's been rescued by physics before. Careful, you say in that vendor voice you've learned. It's warm, honey poured over a stern plank. You sell one boy an apple for half price, and the other a story about how the sweetest fruit grow on trees that argue with the wind. He tells you the town crier changed his route this morning. Smaller loop, quicker, pass by the Guildhall. That's nothing unless you're looking for who wants a message to be louder in one place than another. Today you are. A woman you recognize by her walk rather than her face. Alewife, good head for numbers, tragic patience for nonsense, lingers at your stall, not touching the fruit. Weather, she says, looking up like it might apologize. Rivers dropped a hand's width. That's not small talk. That's code you agreed on 5 nights ago in the tavern's back corner. Low river means slow road couriers will be on foot, not barges. You nod and nudge the mint sprig half an inch to the left. It's silly theater, but it makes both of you feel like you're not saying the thing you just said. You flip an apple and catch sight of a tiny groove carved into the wicker lip, 3 short cuts, 1 long. That's your other signal for the day, left by the boy who set up stalls for a penny at dawn. He's telling you to be a booth for secrets after noon. You have apples enough to be patient. By mid-morning, the square is a current you can read by touch. 2 masons buy pairs and complain about a new foreman with city hands at the walls, which tells you a noble's sending his own men to check the mortar. A pilgrim with 6 badges on his hat, Santiago, Rome, Canterbury, real or fake, who can tell from here, asks whether apples keep well in a pack. He wants to be looked at, so you give him enough attention to feel seen and little enough to feel safe. He buys 3 and leaves the 4th on the basket lip, a token or an apology or an invitation. You pass it to a passing nun who's more amused than she lets on. A guard ambles by, checks your weights with a set of tiny brass cubes, and finds them pleasingly boring. You've sanded the scale pans until they show every smudge as a halo. Honest dirt is good camouflage. He asks if you've seen a weaver's boy with quick hands and quicker feet. You haven't, not since he learned to hold a bowl better than a grudge. The guard nods and moves on, haloed by the smell of leather and petty authority. You keep your own ledger in your head, 2 names at the gate, 1 feathered shame, low river wall, foreman crier's route, absent weaver's boy. It's a stew. You let it simmer. Joke 1, if espionage fails, you could open a soup stall. Today's special is overheard gossip with mint. Your neighbor to the left sells onions with the moral fervor of a preacher. She glares when you crack a smile, then leans over to whisper that a certain cloth merchant has switched from teal bolts to plain undyed, which means his money's gone pale too. You tuck that away. Money changing color tends to leave fingerprints. Mainstream historical fact drifts by in the form of the town crier himself, bell in one hand, parchment in the other, proclaiming the fines for false measures, the feast day fasts, and a list of license renewals for stalls. His presence is your reminder that markets weren't free-for-alls. They were choreography, and the dance steps were written down. Quirky tidbit, some cities painted stall numbers on the cobbles or carved them into the timber fronts, so a family's claim was literally in the street. Others rented the same wood panel back and forth so often that my stall meant my plank, not my place. Historians still argue whether guilds or councils controlled the choicest corners. Most tightly records show both hands on the scales, depending on who held the quill that year. Around noon, you shift to phase 2, the part where your stall becomes a wall with ears. You tilt the awning to deepen the shadow behind the baskets. Anyone stepping into that shade can speak a sentence safely to a pile of apples, which conveniently repeats nothing unless paid. You sort fruit with exaggerated care and let people help by moving a piece from one basket to another the way you taught them weeks ago. 3 apples placed on the left, 1 on the right. That's a meeting request at dusk by the rope walk. 2 and 2 bring money. 1 on each side, then a pair on top, danger. Today a baker's boy does the last without even looking at you. Pair on top. You remove it calmly and sell it to a passing notary who never eats pears in public. You smile with all your teeth at the boy. Message received. The warning arrives on 2 legs and a limp. An old man with a cane accidentally knocks your chalkboard and gives you an apologetic and very deliberate nod toward the far side of the square. There, a pair of men in mercenary leathers pretend to admire the Fletcher's arrows while counting heads. They're new in town. Their cloaks haven't learned the dust. Not watchmen too many knives. Not guild muscle too quiet. You decide to be extra boring for 10 minutes. You discuss the relative merits of russets versus pippins with an enthusiasm that would fool saints. You use your scale as your pen. The right pan is for coin. The left is for whispers. A woman places a small brass coin and a folded scrap. You weigh the coin, miss the fold, and let it slide under the rim. Later, when you clean, you'll have her message, foreman met feather. Evening. You do not sigh aloud. Of course the foreman met the feather. The walls are an expensive stage. Everyone wants a line. Joke 2, you consider charging a listening fee, 1 farthing per scandal, mint garnish included. A quarrel bursts like a dropped jar near the spice cellar. 2 men throwing words about a shipment of pepper that didn't arrive. You count the hands that drift toward belts, 3, then 4, then see the spice seller's daughter step between them with a broom held like a banner. The quarrel collapses into grumbling. You make a note, the shipment, the delay, the daughter's courage. Courage is currency. At your elbow, the onion preacher hisses, duck, and you do because she saved your head before. A sling stone zips through where your ear was aimed at someone farther back, but indifferent to the concept of who. You pop up with a neutral smile and sell a bruised apple to a man who believes in signs. Your heart pretends it's a drum for a minute, and then decides to be a heart again. Mainstream historical fact, one more serving information, wasn't only carried in words. It lived in gestures, shortages, and routes. A missing fish cart on a Friday told you as much about a river dispute as a clerk's note. A changed watch path like the criers spoke a paragraph in 2 strides. Markets made those paragraphs legible to the patient. Quirky tidbits, some stalls used false bottoms, not for smuggling goods, but for smuggling gossips, literally hiding a child or slight woman beneath to overhear bargains while the buyer thought he'd leaned close enough to keep secrets. Whether that's an exaggeration or a marginal trick from a specific city, historians still argue. Either way, you've seen a cooper's boy slither places barrels would envy. By late afternoon, your ears are full and your baskets are honest in their emptiness. You tally coin, which is less important than tallying knowledge. Names to pass to the candlemaker, the feathers meeting, the wall foreman gate, rota, rumors, the low river, the mercenaries who don't yet have dust in their hems. You'll package it later in the language of my cousin says. And did you hear? Because secrets travel better when they think they're gossip. Joke 3. You practice your market voice in your head. 2 apples for a whisper. 3 for a rumor with sources. You fold the awning pack, the baskets, and leave the mint sprig on the stall leg for the next poor soul who needs to look harmless. The onion preacher watches you go with a nod that could be blessing or inventory. Willem appears like a shadow, stepping out of a line, takes 1 basket from you and falls into step without comment. He smells faintly of tar and stale apple, which is to say like someone belonging on any street. Fair day, he asks, and you answer with your shoulder, because too much sound would spill what you've collected. He gets it. He always does. You drop 1 basket at the chandler's payment for the soot that will turn today's whispers into tomorrow's careful sentences. The other you carry home. On your table under your window where the light is kind, you write the only 2 words that make all of this easier. Listen first. Then you blow the lamp because you've done enough for 1 square's worth of afternoon, and the night has its own market to run. The night market is a different creature altogether, smaller, hungrier, and quieter in the wrong ways. You arrive as the last of the legitimate vendors are packing up their carts, creaking homeward under what's left of the day's trade. In their place, little pockets of activity form under weak lanterns, a row of tinkers selling repairs by firelight, a few fishmongers with barrels of eels that slither lazily in the dark water, and the smell of roasting chestnuts drifting from somewhere you can't quite see. But you're not here for chestnuts. Your contact tonight is supposed to be a gambler named Raynolf, the sort who makes money more by knowing when not to win than by skill with dice. He's rumored to keep 1 hand in the game and the other in a purse that isn't his. A man like that is valuable. He hears what desperate men mutter when coin leaves their fingers. You find him in the shadow of the linen tent, seated cross-legged with a little crowd around him. The dice bounce in his palm like restless thoughts. You hover at the edge, letting him finish the throw. He rolls a double 6, collects his winnings without a smile, and glances up to catch your eye. Mainstream historical fact, medieval gambling dens, whether legal or hidden, were fertile ground for informants. Authorities often tolerated low-stakes games in public squares because they kept potential troublemakers occupied, and in one place, easy to watch. Quirky tidbits, some gambling tokens doubled as safe passage markers. A coin with a bent edge or a carved sign could mean let this person through at certain gates or checkpoints. Historians still argue whether this was an organized system among guilds and guards, or just a convenient fiction for smugglers. Ranulf gestures to a spot beside him. You sit palms open to show you're not here to play. Long walk from the square, he says. That's his signal for we're clear to talk. Joke 1, apparently every spy in this city thinks you spend your whole life walking. From a pouch, he produces a folded scrap of parchment and slides it toward you under the cover of adjusting his dice cup. The crowd is too busy watching his hands to notice yours. You open it just enough to see 3 names and 2 dates, one in the past, one tomorrow. A short note follows, meeting at the weir. Bring fish. The fish part is not literal. It means someone needs to be smuggled past the river watch using a fisherman's permit as cover. You ask who's on the list. He shakes his head. Not mine to know, just yours to carry. Ranulph keeps talking about a recent dice run to the docks, but every third sentence is for you. The Red Tavern's closed. Means the guard rotation is shifting. Baker's lad broke his arm. Means a regular courier's out of commission. It's all scaffolding building the picture you'll need tomorrow. The gambler's hand brushes yours briefly as he passes the dice, and you feel something small and metal in your palm. You keep your fingers closed until you've left the tent. Under the nearest lantern, you see it's a thin copper ring, the kind street peddlers sell by the handful. Inside, scratched so faintly, you have to tilt it to read as a single word, north. You know what that means. Whoever you're escorting tomorrow needs to leave through the north gate, not the river. The fish was a false trail for anyone else listening. Mainstream historical fact misdirection was a standard espionage tactic in every era, but in the Middle Ages, false trade manifests and forged guild passes often carried the weight of life and death. Quirky tidbit, some spies carried charm items, rings, brooches, even shoes engraved or stitched with codes. These might mean nothing to anyone else, but to the intended recipient, they were as clear as a map. Historians still argue how often such items were planted to deliberately mislead enemies rather than help allies. You tuck the ring into the seam of your cloak lining and drift toward the far end of the market. There's a potter there who's also a message keeper. You buy a small clay lamp from him, no wick, no oil, just the shell. The way he wraps it, folding the paper twice before tucking it under the twine, tells you he's seen the copper ring and understands. Joke 2 at this point. Half your shopping is for things you never intend to use. As you loop back toward the main road, you pass a knife sharpener singing under his breath. The tune shifts when you're near a fragment of a ballad about a drowned knight. That's another code, one you haven't heard in months. It means the river's dangerous this week. Maybe the false fish message wasn't only for misdirection. You file it away, adding it to tomorrow's plan in your head. North Gate, not the river. Watch for anyone pushing you toward the docks. The crowd thins as lanterns are snuffed. You make your way out along a lane where only the tavern signs still swing in the night air. Ranulph's voice lingers in your mind, not the words, but the cadence. He has the rhythm of a man who survives by keeping other people's secrets louder than his own. When you finally reach your street, the last of the shutters are closing. You slip inside your own door, set the clay lamp on the table, and scratch a quick note in the margin of an old ledger north. Drowned night. Then you blow out your candle. Joke 3, you tell yourself you'll sleep early tonight, but in your trade, early just means before the next knock. The city outside has gone quiet enough to hear the wind curling between the roof beams. Somewhere a dice cup rattles again, starting another game. Somewhere else someone hums the Drowned Night tune, and you can't tell if it's for you or for them. Morning drifts in like thin broth, warm enough to be something, not strong enough to be a meal. You wake to a whisper under your door, a sliver of parchment pushed through with the patience of a cat's paw. When you unfold it, your fingertips come away dusty with pounce ground cuttlefish bone sprinkled on fresh ink to keep it from smudging. Someone wanted this to look like the kind of message clerks send each other before breakfast. It isn't. 3 words in a tight, tidy hand. Bring the seal. You know which seal. Not yours, nothing so foolish, but the counterfeit you've been nursing like a guilty thought. A copper copy of a lord's signet pressed from a die that cost you 2 favors and a sleepless week. In the wrong hands, it is a small war. In yours today, it's a letter that bends a siege like a reed. The city is still rubbing its eyes when you step into the lane. You pass the onion preacher setting out her baskets, each bulb arranged like a chorus chanting duty. She gives you a nod you've learned to read as I'm pretending to notice nothing. The town crier takes his shorter route again, cutting close to the Guildhall, your earlier note about that still warm in your pocket, like a coal that refuses to die. You smell mint from the herb stall, just enough to make you wonder whether the apple-giving woman is up yet tucking green comfort into someone else's day. Your workbench is a humble scrap of table shoved under a window that sulks at the light. You lay out the tools. A sheet of vellum rubbed with pumice powder, so ink will bite a goose quill, sharpened to a whisper, walnut gall ink, black as a good secret sand, to dry at a stick of red wax, the counterfeit signet wrapped in linen like a sleeping snake. You breathe. Hands steady, mind quiet, voice inside, doing that soft ASMR count you're training it to do in for 4 out for 6. Mainstream historical fact official orders in the late Middle Ages lived and died by seals. A ring or matrix pressed into warm wax carried an authority that out-talked any scribe. Chancery clerks were trained to recognize hands and formulas, but in the field, at a wall, on a road, most folk trusted the stamp before the words. Counterfeiting a great lord's seal could mean mutilation or the rope if you were caught. Carrying a forged order could mean the same, plus whatever the insulted soldiers decided you deserved on the spot. You copy the cadence of a man you've never met, his clerk's Latin crisp, and slightly too proud, the little loops on his pias, the way he likes to say forthwith, like it's a prayer. The letter is short, orders are sharper when they're lean. It tells the captain at the siege's western sally port to stand down for one day to reset the machine. That's not nonsense. Siege engines break like hearts do when the timing is worst. Add a line about receiving fresh timber and men from the North Road, and a sentence about trusting no private messengers from the river. Thank you, drowned night tune, and you have a plausible lie that could pry open a crack wide enough to slide a miracle through. When the ink is dry, you raise the stick of wax to a candle flame and let the red lake onto the fold. The counterfeit press goes in smooth and slow. When you lift it, the mark is perfect. The tiny nick on the circle deliberate, the faint ridge accident that became a signature. The shape that looks like a hair if you squint. You sand the edges with breadcrumbs to dull the too new sheen. For extra age, you stroke the parchment over a curl of candle smoke, just enough to kiss it with a kitchen's life. Quirky tidbit aging letters is an art older than any guild. You've heard of messengers dabbing wine at the corners to fake a spill, rubbing onion skin to tint an edge, even pressing a sheet under a warm saddle blanket to give it the soft-handled sag of something that's lived in a courier's bag. Whether any of those tricks started with spies or bored clerks is one of those things historians still argue over while pretending not to enjoy the gossip. You wrap the order in a scrap of plain cloth, tie it with twine that has seen better days, and tuck it into the safe pocket you reserve for things that could kill you simply by existing. Then you dress like a man who belongs around timber and rope, coarse tunic, a smear of pitch on your sleeve, the old cap with the torn brim that shifts your face into anonymity. Your boots remember the road. The siege sits like a sulk on the low hills beyond the north gate, a ring of tents and smoke, the dull thud of a mangonel lobbing stones with the resigned rhythm of a tired blacksmith. You pass carts loaded with barrels, oxen muttering in their patient way, a boy carrying a bundle of arrows like a bouquet with opinions. The guard at the outer line doesn't look old enough to shave. He challenges you because challenging makes him feel taller. You keep your voice flat and your shoulders tired. Orders for Captain of the Western Sally, you say, letting orders and Captain do the heavy lifting. The boy looks at the seal like it's his mother's face, then waves you through. A sergeant stops you at the next cordon, older scar at jaw eyes like flint that's already made sparks today. He doesn't read the words. He reads your walk, your hands, the twitch that lives under everyone's calm. From where he asks. North, you answer, and it's true enough for the day. You tilt the folded letter just enough for the wax to catch the light. He huffs once, maybe amusement, maybe a cough, and points you toward a tent with a pennon that has seen better die. Inside smells of leather, damp wool, and the sour tang of men who sleep too little. The captain sits on a low stool, hunched over a rough map that is more ambition than accuracy. He reaches for the letter before you've finished bowing. Men like him eat orders for breakfast and argue with them by lunch. He breaks the twine, sniffs the wax like a dog vetting a stranger, and reads. His mouth does nothing which in a soldier is an opera. Mainstream historical fact, sieges ran on paper as much as on grain. Muster rolls, pay lists, engine tallies, orders to dig or stop digging without letters, supply froze and morale followed. We have surviving caches of such correspondence, oil-stained and smoke-scented proof that even mud and fear respect a good clerk. He signs a page of his own, barks a note to a runner, and to your surprise asks you to wait. You do, hands folded harmless as a bench. Outside, the mangonel's thud shifts to a pause, then a silence so complete you can hear somebody's spoon scrape the bottom of a stew pot. Across the field, a shutter in the enemy wall opens and closes like a blink that hasn't decided what it saw. You don't watch the gap you've made. That's for brass and ballads. You watch the tent flap and the men who pass through it, the way their shoulders rise and fall when orders change, the tiny hiccup in their steps, when something inside them argues. The runner returns, whispers. The captain nods tight. Stand down on Western engines, he says to no one and everyone. Reset timbers. Send the carpenter to the north road. Your lie has learned to walk. You leave with a grunt that reads as deference. No one stops you because no one in moments like this wants to invent new problems. Outside the line, the young guard's eyes are wide in his too soft face. He wants to ask. He doesn't. You keep your cap low and your stride the exact pace of a man who has to be somewhere else for reasons that don't require conversation. Joke 1, you promise yourself a nap when this is over, which is generous of you given that you've never kept that promise. On the way back, you cut through a copse of trees that whisper like they're trading news. You hum the drowned night tune under your breath, one bar only enough to remind yourself to give the river a wide berth, and then switch to silence, because birds should be the only ones singing out here. A rider appears where no rider should, stepping out from behind a hedgerow with the casual grace of someone who never brushes mud off his boots himself. Feathered hat, of course, and a smile that thinks it's a knife. You've met his type on streets and in stories, nephews of reeves, brothers of merchants, cousins of power who practice their menace the way other men practice their archery. Message, he says, palm out. You keep your face blank. Delivered, you answer, which is both accurate and obnoxious in equal measure. He studies your cap, your torn brim, your two normal boots. His smile insists it knows you under all that. Maybe it does. Maybe he's just collected enough rumors to think everyone owes him a secret. I'll remember you, he says. You offer him your best market stall grin. I hope not, you reply, and mean it. Quirky tidbit to unstick and reuse a wax seal without breaking it. Some handlers warmed the parchment gently over steam and slid a hair-thin blade under the wax fish glue would reseal it. Whether soldiers in muddy boots had time for such finesse is another of those things historians still argue over, while wiping at phantom wax with their sleeves. Back in the city, the onion preacher has rearranged her bulbs into a tidy O that might be a joke or a price or a halo for the patient. The apple woman is tucking mint into a customer's palm with the quiet gravity of a priest. You pass the guild hall as the crier takes his short turn again, and you wonder who keeps asking for the message to land there with extra weight. Your head is a ledger. You resist the urge to total the page yet. You climb to the candlemaker's loft with the long legs of someone trying to outrun his own thoughts. Inside, the air is beeswax and burnt wick. Your ink-stained friend tilts his head before you speak. "Done," he asks. You nod. They bought the voice, he adds, and you nod again. He pours 2 cups of thin ale that deserves a better name and slides one to you. Now he says we wait to see if our lie seeds the truth we need. Joke 2, patience is the spy's least favorite dish, always served cold and never with mint. You sit by the small window and watch the street take its evening shape. If the engine crews are idle today, if a carpenter on the North Road is cursing fresh timbers that never arrive, then somewhere a gate might be creaking in a way that matters. You don't need to see it. You only need to hear the bell and the tone it chooses, later triumph alarm, or the same old tired peal of as you were. Mainstream historical fact pops its head back in with a reminder you wish it didn't have. Some of the most famous medieval forged letters in chronicles were likely written by victors afterward to make their cleverness look inevitable. Historians still argue whether certain last-minute surrenders were the work of quills or cousins on the inside who didn't like their rations. The ink in both stories looks the same when it dries, as dusk slides across the rooftops like a cat choosing laps. A runner stumbles up the loft steps, breath doing a drum roll. Engines stood down, he pants. Western watch got lazy. Small party slipped the ditch. No casualties. He grins the grin of a man who thinks paper is magic. You let him. For today, maybe it is. You raise the cup to your lips and taste beeswax in the clay ale thinner than rumor. You let your shoulders drop a notch because you can, and because if you don't, they'll take it anyway while you sleep. Joke 3, you finally award yourself that nap 10 minutes with your eyes shut and your boots still on the medieval equivalent of a spa day. When you wake, the street lamps have started their evening glow, small halos along the lane. You stand, stretch the lie out of your back, and think about tomorrow's truth, whatever shape it will force your hands into. The counterfeit seal lies wrapped in linen again, patient as winter, ready to bite the next wax that dares to pretend it knows better than you. You sleep like a thief, with one ear open, which is to say you don't. Every creak in the beams becomes a footstep, every rustle outside a voice rehearsing your name. By the time the eastern sky blushes, you've given up on rest and are sitting at your table, tracing circles in a damp ring left by last night's ale. A knocklight, but quick, interrupts the art. You open the door to find no one, just a basket of bread rolls, still warm with a folded scrap beneath. The rolls smell of yeast and comfort. The scrap smells of lamp oil and urgency. 2 words follow cart. No signature, no time. Just the kind of brevity that assumes you don't need more. You eat 1 roll standing up, because orders go down better with something in your stomach. Then you pull on a nondescript tunic and hood the sort that makes you look like half the porters in the city. A quick pass of soot across the cheek, and you're furniture again. Outside, the streets are yawning awake. Bakers' boys dash between ovens and stalls. Fishmongers swear at nets that caught more weed than fish. And somewhere a goat decides a pile of turnips is worth a public argument. The cart in question is easy to spot, not because it's unusual, but because it's exactly the kind of ordinary someone wants you to notice. Rough-hewn sides, two oxen plodding with the pace of creatures that have no illusions about glory, a driver with a hat, pulled low enough to hide in plain sight. You follow at the kind of distance that makes you look bored. The route twists through the tannery quarter, always a good place to lose or gain a tail, because the stench makes everyone hurry. You note faces in doorways. A cooper you've seen before at the rope walk, a boy in a stained smock pretending to sweep, but actually watching the street. Mainstream historical fact. Urban spies often used carts and pack animals as mobile cover. Merchants' convoys moved through every part of a medieval city, and slipping in behind them was a way to travel without being singled out. Quirky tidbit: in some port cities, carters used jingling bells on the harness to signal friend or foe depending on the tune. Historians still argue whether this was true code or just local superstition, but you've heard at least two different bell patterns in your time here that made people step aside without a word. The cart stops at a grain warehouse by the north wall. The driver hops down, exchanges a few words with a clerk, and begins unloading sacks. You lean against a post, as though waiting for someone who's late, and let your gaze drift. A second man joins the driver, shorter, heavier, wearing a cloak too fine for grain work. He doesn't touch the sacks. Instead, he hands the driver a small wrapped bundle and gestures toward the far door. You shift position, accidentally catching sight of the bundle's edge, waxed cloth, tied with red cord, the kind used to keep documents dry. Joke 1, you tell yourself it's probably just a love letter, because lying to yourself is free. The driver carries it inside. You slip around the building to the alley where the far door opens. The smell here is worse: stale beer grain dust and the sharp note of mouse droppings, but it's also quieter. Through a gap in the warped planks, you see the driver hand the bundle to a tall man whose boots still carry fresh mud from outside the walls. The tall man tucks it into a leather satchel, checks the street, and leaves by the east gate. Mainstream historical fact gates were as much about information as they were about movement. Each one had its own set of guards, tolls, and eyes. If you wanted to move unnoticed, you chose a gate where you could predict the shift changes. Quirky tidbit: some gates had tiny postern doors used only at night or in emergencies. Bribing your way through one was riskier, but left no official record. Historians still argue how often these were used for espionage versus simple smuggling. You double back, blending into a group of apprentices carrying planks. From there, you shadow the tall man at a safe angle, letting the crowd mask you. He moves like someone who knows where he's going, but not who might be following a combination you can work with. He heads for the weaver's quarter, slips into a dye house, and emerges without the satchel. You wait until he's gone, then step inside under the pretense of looking for work. The air is heavy with the tang of madder and woad. Vats bubble like sullen soup. In the corner on a shelf above a vat sits the satchel. You let your hand trail along the shelf as you pass fingers brushing the leather just enough to find the latch. It's knotted with a simple loop, not careless, just quick. You ease it open, lift the waxed bundle, and slide it into your own bag. In its place, you leave a similar weight, a folded apron wrapped in waxed cloth. To a casual check, it will feel the same. Joke 2, congratulations, you've just committed textile-based burglary. You leave by the back, which smells worse than the front, and cut through 2 alleys to reach the candlemaker's loft. Inside, you lay the bundle on the table. The cord comes off with a single tug, the waxed cloth unfolding, to reveal 3 smaller packets, each sealed with green wax and marked with the same hair you saw on yesterday's counterfeit seal. You and the candlemaker exchange a look. He fetches a thin knife, works it under the first seal without breaking it, and slides out a parchment. It's a list names, trades, and what looks like payments. Some are crossed out, some underlined. A payroll or a bribe ledger. Mainstream historical fact bribe lists from medieval towns did exist, sometimes even kept openly by officials who saw gifts as part of their office. Surviving examples are rare, but they're damning in their bluntness. Quirky tidbit green wax was sometimes used for informal or private correspondence, its color linked in some places to fertility luck, or just the fact that verdigris was cheap. Historians still argue whether color choice in seals had universal meaning or was purely local fashion. The second packet holds a sketch map of the city marked with circles at 2 gates and a cross over the river. The third contains a short letter in the same hand as the ledger instructing someone to prepare the northern road and silence the onion seller. That last part makes your stomach knot. Joke 3. You briefly consider changing your name to Onion Seller, just to see how many assassination orders you'd collect. You reseal the packets, rewrap the bundle, and slide it back into your bag. Whoever was meant to get it won't notice the delay until you've had time to decide what to do with it. The candlemaker leans back, eyes narrowing. This isn't just spying anymore, he says. It's pruning. You leave the loft with the bundle hidden deep and your mind on the onion preacher's stall. The market hum is starting up again, but this time the air feels charged, like the moment before a summer storm. Somewhere in the crowd, someone's looking for a cart that's already gone. You head toward the market with the bundle pressed flat against your ribs, the way a guilty thought tries to make itself into a rib. The crowd is still assembling shadows, slotting into the cobbles, voices warming up from mutter to chatter. The onion preacher is exactly where she always is, baskets in stern little ranks, chin tilted like she's appraising the morning for defects. When she sees you, the line at one corner of her mouth softens, which in her vocabulary is a hug. You don't say someone wrote, "Silence the onion seller" with green wax and a hair. You say rain later because that's the code you invented years ago, weather for danger. She nods and replies, "I have a canopy, which is onion for let them try." There's no need to spook the square, but your eyes start doing the counting trick, doorways, roof lines, any coat that isn't dusty enough to belong. 2 mercenary cloaks, again near the Fletcher, still trying to pretend they're shopping, still not quite believing dust is a uniform. Willem appears like punctuation, then turns into a barrel buyer by the Cooper's thumb, tapping the rim in a code only you two use, careful. Watch the north. You tap your hip once under the cloak, I know. You take a place at the edge of the bread queue, where conversations intersect like string on a loom. The ledger in your bag might be the kind of thing that boils a city if you lift the lid too fast. Names, payments, instructions like seeds pinned to paper. Add water, get weeds. You could run to the Reeve, but his fringe likes audiences. You could whisper to the guild hall, but you remember the feather and feathers love spectacle. Or you could do the old ugly work, pay first, buy time, then prune hard. Mainstream historical fact taps your shoulder with a dry finger. Bribery wasn't a side hustle in medieval towns. It was a column in the civic budget. Gifts, fees, honoraria, the line between courtesy and corruption, had the thickness of a ribbon and the flexibility of one, too. Town account rolls sometimes recorded gifts to the watch or wine for the sergeants as routine. Royal officers issued stern reminders against maintenance powerful men, keeping clients on retainers, then quietly maintained clients of their own. So you do what centuries of uneasy citizens have done. You pick a purse, you find a mouth, you buy a silence that may only last as long as breath. First mouth, the clerk who runs the gate tallies on the North Road, the one with ink on his cuffs and a conscience that looks like mildew. He's at the edge of the square pretending to read a notice while watching everything else. You sidle up and let a coin roll from palm to palm. Once, twice, he catches it. with fingers trained to catch falling facts. Short shift at the north gate, you murmur. Keep the wrong eyes occupied when a wagon with blue chalk on the axle arrives. Nothing dramatic, just weight the scale in favor of boredom. He glances down, sees the second coin heavier, and tucks both into his sleeve with the resigned grace of a penitent taking the host. For how long, he asks. 2 turns of the bell, you answer, and if anyone asks later, he half smiles. I will misremember politely. Quirky tidbit: some towns paid criers of silence officials, whose job in guild courts and council halls was to announce hush with a staff tap, and then walk among the benches, jingling a tiny bell at gossips. In a handful of city records, the job description weirdly extends to markets, and even at gates on feast eves, where the silence probably meant no public arguments. Historians still argue whether those roles ever bled into bribed hush work outside the hall, or if that's the romantic rot of later chroniclers who never met a bell they didn't want to make ominous. Second mouth, the spice seller's daughter, the one whose broom ended a quarrel yesterday. She's sharpening knives behind the stall. You trade her a story for a favor, which is the only currency she takes. You tell her about a captain who once paused the Western engines for a day on orders sealed with a hair. You do not tell her who wrote the hair. If 2 men with new cloaks start a fight near the onion preacher, you say trip one and laugh loud. She grins, all broom and bravery. I like to be paid in applause, she says. Set them up. The hair stamped in your memory wrinkles its nose. Whoever's running this ledger loved rabbits on the fake seal you pressed yesterday, on the packets in your bag, maybe on their own ring finger. You pass the Fletcher and glance bows, shafts, feathered fletchings. The mercenaries chuckle at nothing, which is the worst kind of laugh. You pay a boy to run a message to the rope walk, move the north cart up a half hour, chalk the axle. The rope walkers owe you for 3 quiet favors and 2 loud ones. They won't ask why the axle is part of a prayer today. Then you ghost along the edge of the square to the candlemaker's loft. The ladder creaks like an old joke. Inside, the air is beeswax and whispered strategy. You set the green wax packets down. Your friend doesn't open them, just lays a finger on the seals, as if checking a pulse. We going to the council, he asks. Not yet, you say. First we keep a woman with onions alive. He nods, pours you a swallow of ale that tastes like a promise to improve later. So we spend, he says. And we plant noise. You spend. Coin becomes hush, hush, becomes delay, delay, becomes chance. You slip coin to the baker to accidentally spill flour by the Fletcher in 10 minutes. You tip the chestnut man to roll his brazier closer to the mercenary's boots. Hot shins make thoughts stumble. You give a farthing to the lute man and say the drowned night tune is tired. Play the one about the bishop's horse instead. It's louder. You tuck a sprig of mint behind the onion preacher's price board yourself, which is ridiculous theater. But it tells the people who watch small things that someone is watching them back. Joke 1, congratulations. You've become the stage manager of a morality play where nobody is moral and everybody is on time. When it starts with farce, which is preferable to the other options. The mercenary pair angle toward the onions, pretending to fumble coins. The spice seller's daughter steps in with that broom like it's been rehearsing. The baker trips at exactly the wrong moment for exactly the right reason, and a soft cloud of flour kisses the mercenary's cloak. He swears borderline illegal for your ASMR purposes and swipes at it, which brings his sleeve near the chestnut brazier. He hops. The square laughs. The onion preacher raises one perfect eyebrow and says, "No credit until you earn it." One mercenary reaches under his cloak and finds unhelpfully a pear someone left there during the ruckus. He holds it up like a moral question. Your lungs remember how to be lungs again. You slide away while laughter does the job you paid it to. At the north gate, the chalked axle cart is already rolling. The clerk with the mildew conscience coughs his way through a joke with the guard about dried fish and bad road songs. The scale tips. The cart passes. You count heartbeats until the bells give you their permission to stop. Now the part where bribes turn into betrayals, or vice versa. The tall man with the muddy boots of Dye House fame reappears near the guild hall, scanning for something that didn't arrive. He carries a satchel that's lighter than the one you removed his packet from. The feathered nephew drifts in from the opposite side hat, hungry for attention. They don't meet eyes, which is a sign of either deep professionalism or shallow fear. You place yourself 3 paces behind a column and become more stone than soul. Delay says feather. Diversion says mud boots. Hair green. Onions still shouting. The words are too casual. Mud boots palms something toward feather, small metallic. A glint that looks like a ring catching light. If the hair is engraved inside, you're watching a courier chain of rabbits hop across the square. You angle so the light hits, but they shift with that instinct predators have keeping their hands in their own shade. Mainstream historical fact taps in again. Councils prosecuted maintenance and embracery jury tampering with public shaming pillories for bribers and bribed alike. Yet the same councils winked at considerations when results pleased them. Chronicles love neat villains. Archives are messier. You could follow the feather, but you've learned to pluck the strings closest first. Mud Boots turns toward the Dye House street, his habit when things go wrong. You cross the square in the wake of a cider cart, then peel off into the alley that always smells like someone boiled a shoe. He walks fast enough to pretend not to be followed, slow enough to not get winded. At the crook where the wall bends, Willem scrapes a barrel hoop against stone, 1 long, 2 short, the counter signal to your morning knock. Left now. You slip left and appear as if conjured at Mud Boots' elbow. You dropped this, you say, holding out a folded scrap that isn't his but might as well be. He takes it by reflex. In the heartbeat, his attention blinks. Your other hand lifts his satchel flap and finds the ring by touch, thin copper, warm from his palm. Into your sleeve it goes. Joke 2, pickpocketing is just library science with worse lighting. The ring's inside reads south, not north, so there's a second misdirection in play, or a second team prepared to pull you toward the wrong gate later. You tuck that into the ledger in your head, which now looks like a monk's palimpsest, too many layers, not enough clean parchment. Back in the loft, you lay the new ring beside the old one, hair inside both. The candlemaker mutters something charitable about rabbits that isn't fit for a psalter. They're marking routes with jewelry now, he says. Fashionable treason. You push a coin across the table toward him. He pushes it back. Save it. We'll need to pay someone we hate before supper. He's right. Bribes purchase time, but they also hire knives you can't see. You heft the green wax bundle again. The instruction to silence the onion seller could be tomorrow's order or a test for today. Either way, you need to move from defense to offense without spending blood you can't replace. So you choose a betrayal, not hers, theirs. You carry the resealed bundle to the guild hall, not to the reeve, not to the feather. To the clerk who counts timber and hates feathers. He looks at the seals at you at the corner where your shadow forgets to move and decides to be the man he wants to be in a story later. I will open this, he says, in the presence of 3 masters who hate each other. You smile. Perfect. In the hall, under a painted panel of some saint who looks like he's reading a ledger, the clerk breaks the green wax and reads. The masters hiss like kettles. Names become accusations, accusations become how dare you, which becomes how dare you. You stand hands folded, the picture of humility, and let the room boil just enough to steam the hair. When they reach the line about the onion seller, you say very quietly, She sells dear, but she sells honest. Put your coin where your courage is. To your surprise, two of the masters nod. Courage is a currency they don't get to spend often. By the time you emerge, the square smells like chestnuts again, and a little like rain. The onion preacher has sold out of her middle basket and is scolding a man for pretending he doesn't know the difference between ounces and lies. The feather is gone. Mud Boots has found another wall to frown at. The mercenaries have adopted a new hobby, looking offended by flour. The chalked axle cart is halfway to the rope walk, where nobody will look inside because rope is boring until it isn't. Joke 3, you consider adding rope appreciation to your list of interests right under mint and bread that tastes like apology. You pay one last silence 2 coins to the watchman at the alley mouth where you relieved a man of his ring. You didn't see me, you say. He pockets the coins with the elegance of someone who's been not seeing people professionally since his teens. I never do, he answers, which is either a comfort or a threat. You'll decide later. At home, you set the 2 hair rings on your table and blow the dust off the ledger where you've been writing in the margins, because the main text keeps refusing to make sense. You add a line, bribes bought noise. Noise bought time. Time bought a cart past a gate, and a woman 1 more day of onions. It's not poetry, but it's bookkeeping for a certain kind of soul. You catch yourself listening for the drowned night tune, and hear instead the bishop's horse, which is the market's way of telling you the day chose humor over tragedy this time. You pour water because wine lies too kindly on days like this, and breathe until your ribs remember the trick of moving without asking permission. Historians still argue whether most medieval corruption was personal greed or structural necessity. You argue with your ceiling that it's both, and that today you paid the toll to cross a rotten bridge because there wasn't time to build a new one. Tomorrow maybe you'll bring a hammer. For now, you do the bravest thing a spy in your century can do. You sleep for an hour with your boots off. Mint under the window. Ledger face down. Hair rings turned so the engraving kisses wood, not skin. By late afternoon, the city feels like it's holding its breath. Market noise thinned to thread, the onion preacher sold out and polishing her scales with righteous satisfaction. The Guildhall door shut while inside men practice the ancient art of blaming each other in circles. Your ledger says the cart with the chalked axle is through the onion. Woman is unsilenced, and the hair rings are on your table like captured moons. You should take the win. Instead, a boy with mud-daggered shins skids to a stop at your door and blurts beacon. It's only one word, but it changes the color of the air. You don't ask which beacon. In this town, the beacon means the western hill, the lonely shoulder of chalk that watches the road like an old dog. There's a basket up there, a cage of iron ribs hanging from a stout pole stuffed with brush and soaked with pitch. It's not decor. It's a throat. You're moving before your mind catches up. Cloak cap, a coil of tinder rope, the little leather pouch of beeswax you use when damp thinks it can boss fire. Willem is already at the lane's mouth, a barrel hoop over his shoulder, and a face like a man who's been invited to a funeral that might become a wedding. I heard drowned night on a whistle, he says. 3 notes only. Code for river trouble, yes, but the whistle means today. You nod. Who's up there? A keeper with a conscience like wet straw. Translation: the man is lazy and bribable, which is excellent news for awful reasons. Mainstream historical fact beacons weren't just romance for ballads. From the Middle Ages through the early modern period, kingdoms strung chains of signal fires across hills to announce invasion, revolt, or drop everything and run to the mustering point. England's coast and northern marches kept beacon hills named on maps. The Byzantine Empire had a sophisticated line fractoria that could send a warning from Anatolia to Constantinople in a matter of hours. The sight of one hill flaring to wake the next wasn't superstition, it was network. You take the North Road at a jog past the rope walk's long lines drying like harp strings, past the chalked axle ruts you helped create, past the last cottage where the apple woman tucks mint into someone's palm with the unshowy tenderness of a votive. She sees your pace and doesn't call out. She just lifts the mint like a blessing and goes back to her baskets. Joke 1, you mentally petition to make mint the town's official emergency service. The hill path is a goat's idea of fun, steep chalk, slippery under old leaves, hedgerows snagging at your cloak like indecisive hands. Twice you stop to listen the way you've trained yourself to eyes closed, mouth soft, ribs moving like they're counting in a slow language. From below, distant bell, 1 then 2. From above, nothing but wind and the dry cough of last year's grass. Good. If a beacon had been lit, the sky would already be writing in smoke. At the shoulder, where the path flattens just long enough to be polite, you find the keeper's hut, wattle and daub cube door, crooked a stack of brush bundles under a tarpaulin. The pole stands 20 paces away, like a sermon, the iron basket big enough to sit in if you like sitting in soot. The keeper emerges, scratching his beard and wearing the look of a man rehearsing innocence. Evening, he says, as if hills keep ordinary hours. Orders you ask flat. He shrugs in a language made mostly of shoulder. A runner said to ready it. No fire yet. Just ready. Ready means pitch-poured brush packed a single spark away from changing the county's heartbeat. You can feel the hair on the back of your neck. The green wax people love noise. If they can make the militias spill from the villages too soon, every honest cart becomes a suspect, every gate becomes a drama, and your careful pruning turns into wild hedge. You have to snuff a fire that hasn't started. Wind's wrong, you say, stepping past him toward the basket. His eyes narrow. And who are you to know, wind? You point toward the low scud racing the western horizon. Smoke'll sit, you say. It'll choke the town and tell nobody anything. Half true. You dig for the other half, the one you brought in your pouch. Also, the pitch is old. You tug back the tarpaulin, and saints be praised, you're right. Half the bundles are damp and smelling of stubborn pond. You'll get a gutter and a laugh, you add. Not a signal. Quirky tidbit beacon keepers were fined in some towns for letting their baskets rot or their brush get wet. There are records of a man set to watch the beacon being given a ration of ale and bread for staying on the hill in foul weather. Sometimes even beacon ale brewed by the parish for the purpose. In other places, the duty rotated among villagers who preferred sleep to good citizenship with predictable results. Historians still argue whether beacon chains ever carried more than binary lit or not lit, or if stories about colored smoke or timed intervals in the medieval West are later fantasies grafted onto simpler systems. The Byzantines did code lengths. Your hill does yes, no. You work fast because the kind of luck you've been riding today only lasts as long as you insult it with urgency. You pull brush out of the basket, testing dry, wet. You chuck the wet into a sulk pile and lay the dry end up for air. You find the pitch bucket and tip it. The stream is more patient than you can afford. You glance at the keeper. Got lamp oil. He grunts, produces a clay jug. You sniff good bitter. You dribble a ribbon of it through the waiting kindling, then smear beeswax from your pouch on the stubborn places. Wax will take a spark and be owlishly grateful for it. Who told you to ready, you ask, not looking at him, because faces lie more easily to eyes. Runner with a hair on his ring, he says, and your stomach performs a full medieval liturgy. He shrugs again. said North Road in danger. You look over the town. The North Road lies like a quiet vein. The chalked cart you helped send is beyond this hill, by now God's willing. Runner name, he scratches again. Featherhat, he says. Of course. The nephew thinks he's learned hills. You slow yourself on purpose. Hurry can smell like guilt. We'll test smoke, you say. Dry bunch, small light. See what the wind does. He nods easily, persuaded by verbs like test that sound like responsibility. You climb the ladder and wedge your boots into the iron. From here, the town looks like a toy under a big sky, and the road and the thin scratch of river that hums a drowned night tune, whether it means to or not. You pinch off the tenderest dry twigs, make a little nest with a whisper of straw, and strike your flint. Spark, spark, glow. You hold your breath the way you learned under the rope and the river out, not in, so your hands can be steady. The glow takes. You feed it one twig, then two, then you cover it with your palm and starve it. It sighs into nothing. Smoke went flat, you call down. Bad sign. We wait for a turn. You deliver the lie like you delivered the forged seal, with the confidence of a man who believes his own breath. The keeper grumbles in a tone that means he'll accept more ale. You hand him the jug back. He drinks like a man doing a job. If a real runner comes, you say he'll have the ward's token. What token, he asks, squinting. You tap the pole and invent one. He'll tie a knot truth hitch above the first iron brace. Old sailors swear by that knot. Old liars use it too. He nods like a man pleased to own new knowledge and steps away to examine the brace for non-existent rope work. That buys you minutes. You use them. You pull 4 damp bundles farther from the pile, arranging them where they'll be useless for an hour. You nick the pitch bucket slyly to flutter a thread of liquid down its side and into a waiting seam in the chalk. One wrong kick will marry it to the earth. You quietly bury the half-handful of char you started, so no one can blow it to theater while you're halfway down the hill. Then you close your eyes and rehearse answers for 3 different men, for the feather, for a guild sergeant, for a real runner with a real token. Joke 2, you add amateur arson prevention to your growing resume between fruit stall seal press and barrel enthusiast. Below, a dog barks like a question. Farther off, another beacon hill sits dull under the cloud line. You wonder how many pairs of eyes there are like yours, counting breath and smoke and lies on this same wind. The Byzantines built fire towers that talked across mountains. Your tower talks across gossip. Both are expedient. Both can be wrong. Your keeper returns with a grunt of satisfaction over a knot that doesn't exist. We wait, you repeat, and feel the hill agree, the way chalk holds sun. The way grass hisses a little when cold slides through it. The way your ribs remember that counting backwards from 4 slows time. The sun knees the horizon. If the hare planned a dusk flare, they've lost the edge. Once lanterns prick the town, even a good beacon doesn't broadcast as far as pride thinks it does. A real runner appears at last, boots honest with mud breath, like bellows tabard bearing the ward sign, 3 onions on a field, bless that joke life told you. He doesn't flash a ring. He pulls a token from his pouch, a thin strip of leather plaited in a pattern the watch uses on mustering days. He ties it above the first iron brace with the knot you named. You want to laugh and don't. He holds up a small slate showing 2 marks. 1 for smoke, only call men to gather. 2 for flame muster arms at the green. Tonight's order asks for smoke alone. You nod. Your keeper nods. Your chest loosens. Smoke you can control a little. Flame less so. You build a little cone the way decent fire builders do, heart of straw and twig ribs, of brush skin, of thinner sticks. You light it with the piety you save for candles, and for fragile lies. It smolders, then sends up a gray finger that the wind breaks and spreads the way rumor spreads, thin, persuasive, everywhere and nowhere. Below, 3 small groups of men detach from doorways and drift toward the green, more curious than warlike. No horns, no panic. Just the town rehearsing a muscle it might need later. Mainstream historical fact, again, comforting as a clerk. Many beacon orders specified smoke by day, flame by night, and some parishes were fined for over-enthusiastic fires that lit the wrong hills. Muster rolls show turns out that ended in stew and cider more often than blood. Signals save lives when they're right. They cost sleep when they're wrong. You let the smoke run and starve the flame at every chance, splitting sticks with your boot heel, spreading coals with a damp rag, pretending to adjust when you are in fact smothering with technique. The keeper doesn't notice because he expects fire to obey men who stand on ladders and shout. It obeys the little work instead. When the slate turns to one mark enough, you let the heart die, the way you learned to let a lie die gently, with plausible mutters, leaving no coal arrogant enough to relight itself. You stir ash until it reads as humility. You cap the basket with a mat of green that will ensure the next spark sulks. Good test. The keeper says, proud as if he invented prudence. You clap him on the shoulder, pass him the last of the ale, the beacon ale he'll tell his friend about, and start down the hill with bones gratefully pointed toward gravity. A runner slips past you, going up different tabard, different breath, a hair ring glinting on the string at his neck. He sees the smoke's tail reads done, and swallows his theater whole. At the foot of the hill, the apple woman is closing her stall. She holds up a sprig without a word. You take it and tuck it behind your ear because you need a harmless joke to carry home. Willem emerges from a hedge like a punctuation mark. Lit, he asks. Smoked, you answer. And we kept the town from singing too loud about nothing. Joke 3, you suggest we start a choir that only hums when it has proof. Back in the square, the onion preacher has her canopy half folded and a story already loading in her mouth about mercenaries who fear flour and brooms. The Guildhall's lamps glow behind shutters. The feather's hat is nowhere. The drowned night tune is replaced by something brighter about a horse that refused to kneel. Your lungs, long accustomed to other people's timing, decide to choose their own for a whole minute. It feels like treason. It feels like relief. Historians still argue whether beacon keepers were heroes of vigilance or farmers who wanted an excuse to drink on hills. Your hill had both possible men in one body today, and for once that made the world easier. You add a line to your ledger when you get home after setting the hair rings face down and the mint in a cup. Snuffed fire by calling smoke wisdom. Kept the hair hungry and the town unafraid. It isn't elegant. It doesn't need to be. Truth tonight is a small breath not wasted on wrong flames. You don't plan to be at the border by dawn. Borders are the sort of places you visit only when you must like sickbeds and debtor's court. But a note under your door at midnight reads, seal needed before sunrise. South Gate. The hand is careful, thin strokes like someone used to tracing patterns on parchment, not shoving ink into it. The only seal you have that would pass at the southern post is one of the hair rings you lifted from mud boots, and the last thing you want is to return their own teeth to their bite. Still must is must, and spies are essentially professional errand runners with worse excuses. You pocket the copper ring, wrap your cloak against a wind that smells of wet clay, and walk the long arc of the wall toward the south. The moon sulks behind cloud, which is both helpful and theatrical. Mainstream historical fact in the Middle Ages. Border crossings weren't always the neat fenced affairs of maps. A border could be a river ford, a stretch of forest, a hill crest. or simply a toll gate at the edge of one lord's reach. Gates in city walls acted as choke points, where goods people and gossip were taxed in equal measure. You paid in coin, in kind, or in words, and sometimes in silence. The South Gate has its own personality, where the north faces the road to market towns and wears the cheer of regular trade. The south faces hills and more hills, the nearest neighbors a half-day away. Its guards are fewer, its torches fewer still, but their eyes are sharper because boredom sharpens or blunts, and these men took the former path. Tonight, there are 3-1 leaning against the postern, with a pike one sitting on a barrel, mending a strap, and one at the little table where documents are weighed against the patience of whoever's holding them. You give them your market porter posture, slight stoop, uneven pace, a look that says, "I've been hauling sacks all day and will fall asleep standing if you keep me here." The table guard holds out a hand. Seal. You fish the hair ring from your pouch and set it on the plank. His eyes flicker. He doesn't touch it, just calls over the strap mender. Confirm. The second guard studies the inside of the ring, runs a thumb over the south engraving. Looks right. But the way he says it tells you there's a second kind of right. He's waiting for the kind that comes with a face or a password. Quirky tidbit, some medieval cities had gate seals, rings, stamps, or even carved wooden tokens that changed every few months to prevent forgeries. The keepers of the new seals sometimes forgot to swap them in on time, either from laziness or because someone's coin encouraged forgetfulness. Historians still argue whether most forged seals were made by skilled goldsmiths moonlighting for the underworld, or by officials who found it profitable to lose a few pieces from their own desks. You slide a folded scrap toward him. It's blank. He looks puzzled until you tap the upper left corner, twice your signal for read what isn't there. He tilts the paper toward the torch. Slowly, in the thin heat, faint letters bloom in a hand he recognizes. You wrote them hours ago in milk, the words rising now like a quiet conspiracy runner delayed. Clear for cart and rider. It's vague enough to be any errand and specific enough to be none. The strap mender's mouth tightens. He nods to the pike holder. Let him through. The pike holder shrugs. Your call. You don't smile until you're halfway down the cobbled slope beyond the gate. Past the lantern's reach, a rider waits, small framed hood, low a pack, strapped behind the saddle. Took you long enough, she says. Her voice is familiar in the way a knife's weight is familiar used before, maybe in a different scabbard. She leans, and you see her face under the hood, the spice seller's daughter. Market's quiet enough, you say. She grins. So I borrowed a horse. Her job tonight is the dangerous half of your forged order slipping across the border to deliver something you don't want traced back to you. She hands you the reins. Hold while I fix this. She kneels by the pack, unfastens it just enough for you to see a roll of parchment wrapped in oilcloth, tied with a thin braid of horsehair. The braid means it's for someone in the hills, not the valleys. Horsehair is a local code. You check the road behind empty, except for a fox crossing like it owns the stones. South road's clear for a cart too, you tell her. Might be a diversion. Keep your eyes open. She swings back into the saddle with the kind of grace that gets bards in trouble. Always do, she says, and nudges the horse into the dark. You wait until the hoofbeats fade, then turn back toward the gate. Inside the walls again, the guards are where you left them, which is both reassuring and suspicious. The strap mender eyes you, message go through. She didn't drop it in the ditch, if that's what you mean, you answer. He smirks. Mainstream historical fact, again, forged seals and passes weren't just tools for smugglers and spies. Pilgrims used them too to prove safe conduct or tax exemption in towns along their route. Surviving examples, real and fake, show just how easy it was to copy a design when you had access to the original for even a few minutes. Joke 1, you think about starting a sideline in fake pilgrimage tokens, but your knees ache at the idea of walking that much. Before leaving, you watch a moment longer. The pike holder shifts his weight like a man counting coins he hasn't been given yet. You make a mental note to find out who pays him to tilt scales. You also notice something you didn't before. Under the edge of the document table, scratched into the wood, is a hair. Not a flourish, not an accident, 2 long ears, a round haunch. It's old. The edges of the cut are smoothed by time and hands. Either the hair has been here longer than you thought, or someone wanted you to think so. Joke 2. Maybe the hair is less a symbol and more a graffiti artist with excellent stamina. You leave the gate with the ring still in your pouch, the scratch still in your mind, and a new thread in the knot you've been trying to untangle. Whoever carved that hair wanted it to be part of the wood part of the post, part of the border itself. The thought makes your shoulder itch as if the city has ears that can lean. You take the long way home through streets where the lamps are fewer and the cats are braver. At the corner by the baker's, you see the onion preacher under the canopy she hasn't quite taken down. She hands you a roll without comment. It's still warm. You take it without comment. Warm bread at midnight is better than any oath. At your table, you set the hair ring beside the one marked north. 2 directions, 2 gates, both with their own carved hair. You wonder how many more there are, and whether the game is to control the gates, or to make you run between them until you drop. You open your ledger and write South open tonight. Hair carved into the bone of the city. Spice Girl rides. Joke 3, under that you add, need better shoes for border work. You fall asleep with the bread half eaten and the rings lined up like patient coins, the city quiet, except for a wind that sounds like it's reading a list of names you haven't heard yet. You can feel the change before anyone says it, the way a street gets careful, the way shutters learn to breathe through a crack. Even the onion preacher speaks softer, which you would have sworn wasn't in her range. There's a sweep on today, not the pleasant kind, that clears straw from a doorway, the other kind. The kind where men who call themselves order practice listening like it's a paid craft. You catch the first sign at the pump where water goes chatty when buckets meet it. 2 fellows in washed cloaks lean nearby, not drawing attention, which is its own way of drawing attention. Their boots are too clean for the tannery quarter. Their eyes are too busy for men with no errands. One carries a roll of parchment he never looks at. The other taps a rhythm on his thigh that never lands on a song you know. You pass neither quick nor slow, and your ribs count quietly the way they learned under rope and river 4 in 6 out. In that long 6, you name them watchers. Mainstream historical fact taps your shoulder with a cold finger. By the 13th century, many continental towns and kingdoms were using the revived Roman canon Ordo Judiciarius, an inquisitorial procedure, where officials initiated cases, gathered depositions, and kept notaries to record every breath you took wrong. Proof came in grades. Above suspicion, but below certainty, was half proof. And only then, at least in theory, could they apply the question, which most people pronounce the way you'd pronounce winter. It was regulated, written down, and wrapped in Latin. It was also like all systems wielded by hands with moods. You slip toward the candlemaker's loft, by a route that should be unremarkable over the rope walk's shadow, past the chestnut brazier along the lane where the drowned night tune used to haunt your ankles. The candlemaker doesn't look up when you climb, which is your sign that he's looking too hard at not looking. They're laying bait, he says low. Not for everyone. For whoever thinks they're clever enough to take it. What's the bait? A letter left under the well lid in Soap Alley, he says. Waxed green, hair in the seal, and a very clumsy crease like somebody wanted us to notice they folded it in a hurry. You both stare at the same corner of the table because sometimes staring at truths makes them louder. If you take that letter, the watcher by the pump gets a story to tell his sergeant. If you leave it, a different watcher nods to his clerk and writes in neat brown ink, "Suspect shows caution consistent with guilt." You rub your thumb along a beeswax lump and let the quiet do what it does best: multiply options. Joke 1. There should really be a loyalty card for interrogations, 10 stamps, and your 11th answer is free. You decide to look at the net instead of the worm. The men you call spy catchers have a pattern you can read if you squint. They set a piece where you're meant to look green wax hair easy, and a second piece 3 doors down, a woman with a chipped front tooth who asks the time and remembers faces for a living. They lodge a third piece on the roof opposite Soap Alley, a boy who skins crows for the Fletcher and has eyes like a cat. The watch they pay to linger at the corner pretends to be bored. The clerk who writes the list of license renewals happens to take lunch there. The sweep is a song, and all the instruments are in tune. You go anyway because sometimes choosing a trap is smarter than letting someone choose it for you. Soap Alley is all steam and rind, and gossip suds puddling along the gutter, smell of lye making your eyes blink extra. The well lid carries a smear of green where wax kissed wood. You do not touch it. You lean like your back is tired, and your head is full, and you are in all ways that matter to the watchers a bad candidate for heroics today. You know who will touch it. He always does. Right on cue, the feathered nephew appears at the far end, hat trimmed to the hour, smile shaved to the meaning of "remember me." He doesn't look at the lid. He looks at you, not looking at the lid. Then he turns to the chip-tooth woman, Madam the Time, which buys his boy on the roof a better angle. He is bait and bell in one human. You let your eyes soften past him to the soap water. In its skin, you see the reflection of a second pair of cloaks near the pump, the ones with tidy hands. Net knotting. You don't bite the hair. You bite something else. You walk to the chipped-tooth woman, glance once at the sky like you're a farmer who guesses weather better than saints and say rain. She nods back like onion-like code. "I have a canopy," she says, which is the prayer you needed to hear. You stroll away with hands empty, and the watchers get to write this down as a boring errand day. If they're clever, they'll think you clever. If they're very clever, they'll think you tired and therefore dangerous. They don't get you in the alley. They get you at the gate because they always believe in gates. 2 guards, 1 clerk, 1 sergeant with a jaw that looks like a coping stone. You present your face like a parchment you have no reason to sign. "Name," the clerk asks. You give the one you used at the wharf, the one with the ragged cap. The sergeant says your market name and watches your lips, not twitch. He puts a small leather bag on the table and unties it slowly like a priest laying out relics. Inside, a hair ring, not yours, a scrap of linen that smells faintly of mint, yours by Spies, if not by Sprig, a sliver of beeswax with a thumbprint. It could be any thumb that ever twiddled a candle. "We have questions," he says. "You may have answers." He offers a stool with the odd formality of a host who has never learned how chairs work. This is where the methods begin, soft as wool and twice as suffocating. They don't start with rope. They start with silence. The clerk dips his quill, writes your nothing answers in lines neat enough to fence sheep. The sergeant asks something gentle. "Where were you when the Western engines rested?" As if the word rest isn't wearing a sword. When you say mending a strap at the rope walk, he blinks in the slow way of men who collect blinks like coins. He waits. You wait better. Mainstream historical fact, again, medieval interrogators prized patience. Manuals remind officials to observe the visage and note contradictions, to use confrontation, bringing 2 witnesses face to face, and to return to the same question later slightly skewed. They were also fond of sleep manipulation, holding you just past comfort, in a hall lit poorly where the night watch strolled by at intervals long enough to be cruelty. It wasn't the caricature of constant screaming, it was the arithmetic of again. They leave you for an hour, long enough to let nerves invent crimes you didn't commit, short enough that your body loses count of time. In the next room, you hear the soft creak of the rope you once danced, the rasp of a windlass easing down. Nobody whimpers. That's the point. The sound is a story you are meant to write for them. Quirky tidbit floats across your mind, uninvited. Some towns swore by tricks that sound like tavern lies, making suspects recite the miserere without stumbling, or hold a mouthful of consecrated bread without choking. In one chronicle, a man was made to swallow a hunk of cheese. If it lodged, God had spoken. Whether those were rare local dramas or weekly fare is one of those details historians still argue like it's a wager with saints. The spy catcher's best trick isn't pain, it's theater. They show you a statement from a friend with a wax blob at the bottom, and the wax blob says you're alone. They leave a ring on the table, your hair or one of theirs, who can tell. And it says you've been everywhere we need you to have been. They promise a limited mercy if you'll help the city, and that says we only like you as a mouth. They are, in a word, playwrights. You breathe mint from your sleeve and decide to be stagehand instead. Bring the onion seller, you say, surprising yourself. The sergeant's eyebrow does a small, expensive arch. Why? Because she'll tell you I bought nothing from her on the day you care about, you say, and then scold you for your measures. It is both truth and weapon. If they bring her, your ordinary life proves itself louder than their plot. If they don't, they tell you they prefer paper to people. They don't bring her. They bring the feather. He sits where you sat and puts his hat on the table as if it were a sigil. I know you, he says. From the hill. You tilt your head. I know your hat, you say, from everywhere. His smile finds a knife again. You choose your friends poorly. You think of the spice seller's daughter on the south road of Willem with a hoop against a wall of the apple woman's mint sprig held like a small green sword. You say very softly, I choose them daily. He tries a different net, the friend in the next room trick. The sergeant opens the door so you hear a voice that could belong to the candlemaker, could belong to a ghost with ink. It says the sort of thing any tired man might say when he wants to go home. It is enough to melt lesser spines. Yours has been iced and thawed enough times to remember its shape. The sergeant watches your hands. You keep them folded and boring. He tries the repetition. Where were you when the engines rested at the rope walk? Who did you speak to, the boy with tar on his sleeve? His name you shrug once. He answers to boy when it's shouted. The clerk sighs at the lack of poetry and writes unknown. You let them think you unimaginative. It is a kindness you offer their report. They pull out the taste of the rope next, not hoist, just the loop around the neck, the woodblock under the toes. The sea, we can do this, and we might. He lifts it, lowers it, lifts just enough to make your breath count, and your body remember its river math. You count out on the exhale like Willem taught less fight in the rope then. Confess to what the sergeant says, almost weary. To carrying a book to a scribe, you answer. It isn't a lie. It isn't the whole thing. It is your day with the labels peeled off. Look, the feather says, turning palms upward in a pantomime of peacemaking. We're not the enemy. The hair is. You know that, and you also know the trick. The join us to catch the worst thief bargain. They want a double agent, someone with two hats and no sleep. Bring me a mint sprig, you say, and I'll consider which is the most disrespectful method you've yet used to say no. He doesn't take it well. Men like him never loved botany. Historians still argue whether men in your century were more scared of the question itself or of the lines it drew between neighbors who walked out of the hall clean and who left a smear that followed their boots. They argue, too, whether towns leaned on informers as policy or as fashion, depending on who'd bought whose dinner that month. The paper trail is neat. The people trail isn't. They let you go because you are not today's headline. They prefer hares. You walk out slower than you want to and faster than they'd like. At the door, the clerk coughs the tiny cough he uses for courtesy and slides a folded scrap toward you as if it were an accident. It's blank. You breathe on it, milk rising brown. We will be asked about you again. He has his job. You have yours. Outside, the square has returned to its normal octave, a lute fumbling a forgiving tune, the crier with his smaller loop. The herb stall fanning the smell of mint like a soft flag. The onion preacher glares at your posture and barks, "Stand straight." You obey because it's a relief to have an order that doesn't bite. Joke 2, you consider starting a podcast called Overheard Under Duress, but the only subscribers would be clerks. You walk with Willem as far as the rope walk. He says nothing because he has learned the difference between silence as tool and silence as balm. At the corner, the apple woman slips a sprig into your palm without meeting your eyes. For breathing, she says, and you remember section 1 and every breath since. Tonight, you will sleep worse again. The spy catchers will write your name in tidy ink and underline nothing in hopes that someday the underline will appear by itself. They will bait another well and listen to another pump and ask 4 questions that are really 1. You will answer with furniture, with errands, with mint, with rope lessons, with the art of being almost too boring to trap. Joke 3, you draft a job posting in your head. Wanted honest spy catcher with no hat. Feather will pay in onions and gratitude. At home, the hair rings wait face down. You tuck the clerk's milk sentence into your ledger and write under it. They watch, they bait, they squeeze with silence. We answer with breath and timing. The city still runs. Then you blow the lamp and let the room remind you that most days most begin with listening and end with choosing which words deserve your air. The summons comes folded into your bread. That's new. The baker's wife presses the loaf into your hands without meeting your eyes, the way people do when they've agreed to be a doorway, but not a hall. Back at your table, you cut into the crust, and there it is. Wax the color of deep plum pressed with a sign you've only seen twice before, a wheel with 12 spokes, 1 spoke broken. It's the mark of the Cartographers Guild, which isn't a group you expect to ask for help. Mapmakers usually keep their battles in ink. The note is short enough to hide in your palm, surveyor missing. Last seen near the old lime kilns. Bring quiet hands. Mainstream historical fact, medieval surveyors were more than men with rods and chains. They were eyes of the law. Boundaries meant tax rent rights to graze or cut wood. A missing surveyor wasn't just a lost man, it was a lost line, and lost lines could start fights that lasted generations. You set out before the note cools, taking the narrow lane past the tanners, where the air clings to you in a way no bath will cure, and up toward the ridge where the lime kilns sleep. Sleep is generous. Their stone throats gone cold, ringed by mounds of chalk-white spoil paths, scribbled with cartwheel ruts and goat tracks. Lime kilns have their own voice. When they were alive, they hissed and cracked and spat powder that stung skin. Even dead, they whisper in dust. You remember the last time you were here following a boy who'd hidden a stolen buckle in a chimney mouth, thinking fire would guard it. You'd fished it out with a hooked branch while he wept about ghosts. Today there's no boy, but there is a scrap of cloth snagged on the kiln's iron ladder, indigo with a stitched hem. You climb slow, tasting the air. Halfway up, you hear it a faint tap, irregular metal on stone. Quirky tidbits, some medieval kilns had hidden vents and crawl spaces more for maintenance than for mystery, but local children inevitably turned them into dares. You'd heard tales of smugglers stashing goods in the cool season, but historians still argue whether these stories were truth or just chalk-dusted bragging. The tap comes again, softer now, like someone trying not to be heard, but unwilling to be forgotten. You ease around the kiln's lip and peer inside. At the bottom, on the slope of congealed lime, a man sits with his knees up, one hand chained to a rusted ring. His hair is dusted white. His eyes blink against the shadow. "Surveyor, you ask?" He squints. "I was," he says, voice dry. Getting him out is the easy part, at least the climbing. The hard part is that the chain is old, but the padlock is not. You recognize its brass market work from 2 months ago, the kind the hares have been favoring, because it travels well in pockets. You check the chain's bite on the ring's solid, mortared deep. Breaking it would wake the whole ridge. You slide down the dust, taking liberties with your clothes. "Who didn't ask names," he says. "2 of them. Had a map. My map. Said I'd drawn something I shouldn't. Then they took the piece and left me here with the draft from last year." The draft leans against the wall, edges curled, ink faded. You scan it, the local holdings roads the line of the river. Then you see it, an extra mark near the south border, a thin cross where no cross should be. You've walked that patch. It's nothing but gorse and rock. Unless, of course, someone wants it to be nothing. The padlock is the kind you can open with patience and a small, thin friend. You happen to have one in your kit, a sliver of wire saved from the rope walk, coiled like a sleeping snake. It takes longer than you'd like. The surveyor breathes shallow, every clink of wire a pebble dropped into his composure. Then the soft click that sounds like the end of a headache. You help him up. His legs are arguments at first, but dust makes a good crutch. "Can you walk?" you ask. "To the end of the line," he says. You take him out the back way through the goat track that smells of time and trouble. No watchers yet, which means either they think the kiln holds its own, or they're watching somewhere else. Mainstream historical fact, again, boundaries in the medieval period, could be marked by anything from carved stones to streams to an old oak by the ditch. Annual beating the bounds walks kept them in memory. Children were sometimes bumped against the markers, so they'd remember them physically. It made maps less important in the small scale, but more dangerous in the large. Halfway down the ridge, you hear hoofbeats. 2 riders' cloaks, brown as dust eyes, scanning. You push the surveyor into the time and crouch low. The riders pass slow enough for you to see the glint of a hair badge on one bridle. The broken spoke seal in your pocket feels suddenly loud. Joke 1, you consider asking the guild to issue summons in invisible ink next time. When the road clears, you move again. The surveyor's pace picks up as the smell of the tanners returns. By the time you reach the back of the guild hall, he's muttering about maps and goats and the audacity of bad locks. The guildmaster meets you at the door, eyes flicking from dust to chain mark on the man's wrist. "You'll have your quiet," you say, handing over the broken spoke note. Inside, the guildmaster unrolls another map, this one newer, cleaner. The cross is gone. In its place, a neat curve of road that doesn't exist. You both know what that means. Someone wants the border to move on paper first, so that when it moves on the ground, no one can say it wasn't always there. Quirky tidbit again, forged maps weren't only for treasure or fantasy. They served as weapons in disputes over land tithes and jurisdiction. One chronicler swore a monastery gained an entire orchard because their map showed a stream always on the far side. Historians still argue whether such changes were fraud or corrections after decades of sloppy copying. The surveyor sits heavily breathing like a man who's climbed out of both a kiln and a debt. "They'll try again," he says. You nod. "Next time, we'll try first." You leave by the side door, dust still on your boots, thinking about lines, how easy they are to draw. How hard to erase, how much trouble it causes when someone does either without telling the people who live between them. Joke 2. You imagine a world where borders are drawn in chalk and everyone carries a wet rag. Back at your table, you press the broken spoke seal into your ledger next to the milk note from the clerk and the 2 hair rings. Symbols piling up, each with their own story, each claiming a piece of the map in your head. The bread the message came in is still fresh enough to eat. You tear it in half, leave one on the sill for whoever leaves you strange errands in stranger packaging. The other half you chew slowly, the lime dust mixing with the crust grit and grain in the same mouthful. Joke 3, you make a note. Bread is not an ideal envelope, but it's edible evidence. Night slides in the lamps, coming on one by one like points on a chart. Somewhere, someone is redrawing a border. Somewhere else, someone is moving a stone. You close the ledger and sit in the quiet, feeling the weight of all the lines you can't see yet. You don't go straight home after dust and borders and broken spokes. Home is a shape you wear when the street is kind. Tonight, the street has its jaw set. You take the long, familiar crook of lanes that ends at a painted door you've pushed a dozen times and regretted 5. A door that sticks when it rains and swings too eagerly when news is bad. A safe house, they call it, which is a word that behaves itself better on a map than it does in real air. From the outside, it's a weaver's widow's place. Whitewash giving up in patches, little window with a shutter that squeaks like a reprimand. A stoop that lists toward the street as if it's also tired of standing. The sign is the same as always, a strip of red yarn pinned under the eave, 2 knots, one for open, one for only, if you're the right kind of trouble. Today there are 2 knots. Your shoulders drop half an inch, which is all the optimism you allow yourself publicly. You knock with the pattern that pretends to be impatient, 3, then 1, the same cadence the drowned night tune sometimes hides under. The door opens just far enough for a palm to appear. It's a palm you trust, lined like a map of years, smelling faintly of soap and onions and the dead sweet of old beeswax. The palm curls, beckons. You slip inside and the door closes with the sigh of a room that learns your shape before it learns your name. Inside is the safe house creed. Nothing worth stealing at first glance, everything worth saving if you look twice. A table with 2 legs honest and 1 leg honest about lying propped with a brick. A shelf of cracked bowls. An iron hook in the ceiling no one uses for its original purpose. A stove with yesterday still thinking about it. And doors, 3 of them. Only one leads where it says it does. Mainstream historical fact, urban safe houses in the late medieval and early modern world weren't called that. But they existed, lodging places, half shops, guild outchambers, monastic guest rooms, homes of widows and single tradesmen whose names show up again and again on depositions and account rolls as where such and such met or where so and so stayed. They were part of the informal infrastructure that carried dissidents, smugglers, and sometimes saints. Authorities knew this, of course. Statutes in some towns specify suspicious houses to be watched, especially those with multiple back exits. The widow Elske to her neighbors, aunt to men who think a soft word will make a hard day go down easier, hands you a cup of hot water as if it's a sacrament, then nods toward the far wall. Roofmen walked past twice, she says, voice the texture of flax. I salted the step. It squeaks now. Her version of a moat. You set your cup down where it can steam productively. The house's rooms are arranged like choices, front room to front, narrow bed closet to the left, pantry to the right, except the bed closet's wall floats, and the pantry's hinge doesn't reach the floor, and the floorboard near the hook lifts with the very particular sound of "we've practiced this." Elske's fingers are on the braid of red yarn at her waist, whirring it like a rosary that buys different mercies. Who else, you ask? She lifts her chin toward the bed closet where a shadow breathes carefully in the dark. You see fingertips, first ink-stained, then a face you know too well. The candle maker. His smile is a stitch he can't tie off. "They asked for me at the hall," he says. "I recommended myself here. Joke 1, you consider printing a calendar, 12 places you shouldn't be caught, illustrated with all your favorite doors. You do a lap of the room the way a cat would if cats worried about jurisdiction. The pantry door opens into the neighbor's yard if you press the latch in with the spoon tied to the string and lift at the same time. The bed closet doesn't hold a bed. It holds a low step and a dumbwaiter rope that feeds into a wine shop 2 houses east. The front door's threshold lifts to reveal exactly one key, iron, heavy, and useless for anything in this house. It's the kind of key you leave to convince a searcher they've found your secrets and can therefore stop being curious. Quirky tidbit. Some late medieval townhouses had priest holes long before the phrase got popular in post-Reformation England. Tight wall voids used for all kinds of hiding, tax chest lids, unlicensed ale sometimes people. In some guild cities, through houses allowed a person to slip from one street to another via a chain of courtyards. Bakers and butchers favored them for obvious reasons, spies for the same. Whether these were built with clandestine purpose or opportunistically used later is the sort of thing historians still argue whether we will ever know. Plans rarely admit to intentions. You step back to the table. Elske sets down bread with the calm of someone who knows how much louder bread is than bravado. "They'll knock," she says. They always do after they walk the roof. Roof first, door second. Men who never carried a baby always think the roof is the clever way to enter a home. You listen. The house does that night before rain, murmur beams settling into thought. Then the knock, courteous official, irritating. Elske breathes out through her nose like a bull considering policy. She doesn't look at you. She looks at the hook. You lift the floorboard there and drop into the crawl just far enough to become a suitcase no one wants to claim. The candlemaker slides into the bed closet and becomes a broom. Elske opens the door a finger's width and lets the sergeant see exactly what he expects: a widow with flour dust on her cuffs and a house that keeps its head down. "We're looking for a man with ink on his hands," he says. "Aren't you all?" she replies. You smile in the dark, which is your worst habit. He requests to enter. She steps back with that particular mixture of reluctance and thorough compliance that makes men feel taller. 2 watchmen in boots that scuff too much, 1 clerk who writes without looking at the page, 1 roofman who has never met a rafter he didn't think might confess. They fan out. The clerk chooses the pantry first because clerks crave shelves. He runs a finger along the edge and frowns at the lack of dust, which is a compliment and a threat. The roofman thumps the beams with his knuckles as if beams respond to percussion. 1 watchman taps the floor with his pike in a rhythm that wants to be music. The sergeant asks Elske if she's alone. "Until you arrived," she says. It is not a lie. Under the boards, you hear the house speak the language of boots. You count the words with your ribs, the way you've learned to count everything that might try to own your breath. The watchman's pike finds your floorboard and pauses. He leans, then decides something more interesting is in the bed closet. You wonder if saints have callings like protect floorboards, and then decide not to get theological about timber. The clerk arrives at the table and opens the ledger Elske keeps there for needles and yarn, and how many loaves went out on which days to which hungry widowers who pretend it's charity backwards. He sniffs, writes something lofty like woman keeps accounts overmuch, which you translate internally as woman exists, must be catalogued for safety. He does not find the iron key because Elske already moved it to the bread oven where even searchers fear to stick hands. Any visitors, the sergeant asks. Elske tilts her head. Men who sell knives you can't sharpen in a good marriage, she says. He blinks twice on register, and in the last hour only the roof, she answers. He nearly smiles. He is not wholly made of badge. Joke 2. You compose a pamphlet in your head, how to answer every question. With a household object by E. When they leave, they do it with the performative tilt of men who prefer to have found something, but make do with finding their own reflection in a window. The roof man lingers. He is the type to trust rafters more than women. Elske closes the door and puts the same bar across it. She always does a bar that would not stop a goat with intent. The real bar is the angle of the alley outside the neighbor's laundry line tied across like a tripwire, the boy who skins crows humming a warning from the tiles. It's a neighborhood invention, safety by chorus. You climb out of the crawl dust clapping off you in little polite clouds. The candlemaker appears with a splinter in his palm, and the look of a man who will forgive a floor the sin of stabbing him because floors hold up plans. Elske cuts the splinter out with a needle, and the kindness of a surgeon who doesn't say this will sting because everyone knows and who needs words wasted on obvious truths. Door's tired, she says, as if this is about hinges. It is, and it isn't. Safe houses die from doors, not from the boards or the beams or the clever holes, but from the part that invites a knock. Doors learn names. Doors teach watchers where to stand. Mainstream historical fact again, Inquisition and Town Watch rolls list houses of meeting. Closed by order, padlocked, sealed with wax and sigils, fines levied against owners who let riotous assemblies gather. Some reopened under new names. Others moved 3 houses down and were called the Bakers, back then the Brewer's Table, then just Elske's, which is not a building, but a way of standing in a doorway and choosing. You sit at the table and look at the 3 doors in the room front. That is honest pantry, that lies well bed closet, that pretends to be where sleep happens. Elske watches you weigh them and laughs without sound. You don't choose doors, she says. You choose neighbors. She's right. The door is wood. The safe house is the web. A plan bubbles to the surface like stew deciding its time. We rotate, you say. We give this door a sabbatical. We open the brewer's table. We pay the boy with the roof eyes to hum when the sergeant's boots start down the lane, not when they're at your step. Elske nods, hands already at her belt for the yarn that becomes the signs that mean more than paper. The candlemaker leans back and squints at the ceiling the way clerks squint at God. And we make a door that isn't a door, he adds. A door that only opens from the other side. Which is to say, a dead drop. The sort of thing doors hate because they love to be actors, and this demotes them to scenery. A gap in the wall behind the loose board by the neighbor's oven. A clay pipe angled so a roll of parchment slides into the flour bin like it belongs to bread. A notch under the eave where a ring can hang with the rain and be mistaken for roof talk. You diagram it with cups and the bread heel, and Elske replaces a cup with a bowl because bowls bend sound better. Quirky tidbit again, some cities used speaking tubes, proper ones in big houses, to shout orders downstairs without shouting down the status hierarchy. In smaller quarters, people made their own reed channels, clay pipes more often to cool ovens than to whisper. But once a tube exists, words learn it. Historians still argue whether the secret tubes in certain monasteries were for confession shortcuts or kitchen talk. Either way, they carry voices. You test the pantry latch with your spoon string. It catches sweetly, as if the house likes having secrets again that don't require performing. The candlemaker wraps his palm and reaches for the ledger. We move the old names 2 pages back, he says, and we only write today in pencil-thin ink that looks like yesterday. Elske tears the yarn tail in her teeth, ties 2 knots open, and only if you're the right kind of trouble, and hangs the braid on the chair instead of the eave. New doorway chair legs, floorboards, neighbors line. The house breathes easier. So do you. Footsteps hush past outside the roof, boys hum, riding them like a soft wing. You all freeze, not with fear, but with the professionalism of people who know how to play dead without dying. The steps pass. In the silence after Elske pours more hot water and drops in a bruised mint sprig. For breathing, she says, smiling the smallest amount 2 lips can smile. You hold the cup and feel your ribs practice the slow count like a choir. Joke 3, you propose renaming Safe House to House that knows your bad habits and keeps them from the neighbors. It will not catch on. You leave just before full dark front door because the performance must continue, or the audience gets suspicious. Elske mutters something about door oiling and honestly oils the hinges, because hinges deserve love even when they lie. The street greets you with its usual choir, lute, learning crier, looping onion morality chestnuts, promising more than they deliver. Across 2 roofs, the boy gives a flick of hand, the sign for clear sky. You tip an invisible hat. He's the sort of saint the city forgets to canonize. On the walk home, you think about doors. The ones you've knocked on, the ones you've barred, the ones you've opened with rings you stole from men who thought rabbits were subtle. You think about the door at the Beacon Hut that led to smoke instead of fire. About the Guildhall door that shuts on blames and opens on bribes. About the border gate with a hair carved into its bone. Historians still argue whether networks like yours were formal cells, codes, oaths, or whether they were simply neighbors who learned not to ask names they didn't need. You argue with your boots that it's both vows that taste like soup passwords, that sound like groceries, and doors that mean more on Thursdays. At your table, you write only 2 lines in the ledger because safe houses like stage magic prefer fewer words. Door sleeps elsewhere. New mouth under the eave. Then you set the ledger face down, as if that could convince it to rest, and tuck the broken spoke seal under it, so the weight of maps can keep the weight of stories flat. Outside, a roof tile clicks like a tongue thinking. Inside, the mint fogs the cup in a way that turns steam into a kind of prayer. You sit breathing with the room and let the house decide what to call itself tonight. Not safe house, not trap. Just a place that learned 3 exits and forgot none. You're at the brewer's table by mid-morning, not for beer, which is too early even for people with your resume, but because the table itself is the meeting. It sits under a low beam carved with a row of hops and faces a wall thick enough to make eavesdroppers' ears give up halfway through a sentence. The brewer calls it his account corner, and when the ledgers open in front of him, nobody questions who sits across. Today, you arrive with empty hands and full eyes. The place smells of malt and yesterday's fire. Its half-lit sun through the warped window, a candle stub guttering like it's bored with its own flame. The brewer wipes a clean patch on the bench with the edge of his sleeve and jerks his chin at the stool across. They'll be along, he says. They turns out to be 2, the spice seller's daughter, cheeks pink from the cold, and the roof boy who somehow looks like he hasn't been down from the tiles in 3 days. The girl lays a folded scrap on the table without ceremony. Wax seal hair again, but this one smudged as if it had been pressed in haste. Inside, beacon due north. Watch for smoke at noon. Change of hands. Mainstream historical fact beacons weren't just for invasion alerts. In many medieval towns and regions, beacon fires were used for signaling between settlements, news danger, even prearranged commercial signals in coastal trade. They worked best in series, each within sight of the next, tended by appointed watchmen. Of course, anything that could carry news could also carry a lie. The brewer grunts. North Beacon's been quiet since Candlefast. Watchman's due for a nap, not a change of hands. He leans in. You think hair work? Or someone wants us to think hair work, you say. And the girl nods like she's been keeping that answer ready all morning. Roof boy pulls something from his satchel, a small cone of soot wrapped in parchment. He tips it onto the table. From the hut chimney, he says. Last night. Still warm when I got it. The soot is fine, almost powder, too fine for wood alone. Quirky tidbits, some beacon fires used pitch resin or even oiled rope to produce thicker smoke visible at a distance. A few accounts mention sulfur or damp straw to change color, a primitive code system. Historians still argue whether the more elaborate recipes were widespread practice or local ingenuity, as evidence is mostly an anecdote. You tap the soot. That's not local wood, you say. That's river pitch, which means it traveled here and not in the hands of the sleepy watchman, you know. The brewer drums his fingers. If they take the beacon at noon, what then? If they light it wrong, the girl says they tell the wrong people the right thing, or the right people the wrong thing. She glances at you. Depends who's watching the next fire in the chain. You picture the map in your head, the ridges, the line of sight from the north beacon to the hill fort, from the hill fort to the coastal bluff. One bad signal, and you could scramble half the watch in the wrong direction, leave the real target with a clear road. Joke one, you think about designing a safer signal. Maybe giant kites shaped like saints, hard to fake, but harder to explain to the parish. The plan is simple because it has to be. You and Roof Boy will go up to the North Beacon before noon. If the watchman's still there, you find out why soot from last night smells like the river. If he's not, you make sure the noon smoke says nothing at all. The climb starts in the low wood north of the brewer's yard, frost crunching under boots. Roof Boy moves like the trees are an easy roof light, deliberate, never where you expect him when you look twice. The path curls upward until the air thins and the wind stops playing and starts pushing. Halfway, you hear it a cough, harsh and wet, the kind that carries more than the man who makes it. The watchman sitting on a stump, wrapped in his own arms, face pale, as if the cold took something from him and didn't give it back. Started yesterday, he croaks. 2 men came, said they were sent from the hill fort to inspect the stack. Took the ladder, said they'd be back by noon. Which noon, you ask? They didn't say. He grimaces, and you notice his belt is missing, too common enough theft, but it means they wanted him slower. You leave him with Roof Boy and climb the rest alone, scrambling over rock and frost until the hut rises in front of you. Stone thatch roof blackened by years of smoke, stack already crowned with a bundle of fresh kindling. Too fresh. Inside the stack's base is piled with oiled rope sticky to the touch, smelling exactly like the river pitch from the table. And on top, tucked under the kindling, is a twist of damp straw smoke changer. Whoever set this up wanted a noon signal with a very particular look. Quirky tidbit again, in some parts of Europe, changing the color of beacon smoke was a known trick for sending a specific prearranged message, often to warn of troop movements or mark the arrival of important goods. Because it was rare, a color change could be instantly recognizable to those in the know and invisible to those expecting normal smoke. You drag the oiled rope, clear fingers tacky with pitch, and kick the straw into the snow. Then you scatter the kindling so it can't be lit in a hurry. You're halfway through when you hear boots. Two men, brown cloaks, moving like they own noon. One sees you and freezes. The other drops the ladder in shock. Wrong day for tending the stack, you say. Wrong person for tending the stack, the taller one replies. His eyes flick to the bundle in your hands, then to the snow where the straw's turning slush. Joke 2, you almost tell him you're just here for the view. They're quick, but you've got the high ground, literally, and the oiled rope's a fine thing to throw when you don't care if it lands sticky. It smacks the tall one's chest, buys you enough seconds to grab the ladder and tilt it into the rocks below. Without it, they'd have to climb the long way, and that path's a misery even in summer. By the time you and Roof Boy get the watchman moving down the trail, noon has passed. No smoke curls from the stack, and somewhere far to the south, a man at the hill fort scratches his head and wonders if the weather turned strange. Mainstream historical fact again, false signals weren't uncommon in war, but catching one before it was sent was rare and rarely written about. Most records come from after the fact, when someone explains why the watch went the wrong way, or why reinforcements showed up to an empty road. Back at the brewer's, you put the pitch cone on the table next to the scrap. They'll try another beacon, you say. We just taught them this one's watched. The brewer nods, already wiping the table clear of soot. So we watch the next. The girl folds the scrap into her sleeve. Roof Boy leans against the wall like it's the first solid thing he's seen all day. You step outside, breathing cold that's free of river smoke, and glance north. The beacon's dark, the ridge quiet, the noon sky holding its breath. Joke 3. You imagine a world where all beacons are just bakers signaling when the bread's done, half the drama, twice the warmth. The road home feels longer with the wind at your back, as if the ridge doesn't like to be left alone after a near miss. You keep looking over your shoulder, not for men in brown cloaks, but for the first curl of smoke you didn't order. Tonight, the sky's yours. Tomorrow, who knows? Your best cover stories aren't costumes. They're chores. You carry things, you complain mildly. You keep your eyes on the middle distance like you're always thinking about soup. Today's suit of ordinary is simple scribe's runner. You've got a leather folder stuffed with vellum offcuts, a quill case tied with twine and ink freckles on your fingers to match the part. Your line rehearsed in the mirror until your mouth believes it. Taking scraps to the binder, master wants them trimmed. It's the verbal equivalent of a shrug. You make it 3 corners into the cathedral, close before the plan starts to feel too clean, which is how you know it will get dirty. Near the well, a choir boy is feeding crumbs to 2 pigeons who don't deserve his charity. He's humming something that wants to be the drowned night tune and keeps turning into the bishop's horse. You nod because children are the city's roof tiles. They see everything and tell only what they decide is useful. He hums louder, then stops eyes on your hands. Binder's runner, he asks. Ink stains wrong. Then he goes back to Crumb's verdict delivered. A gentle omen, your freckles are a shade too new. You fix it as you walk, wipe your hands along a lintel where soot settles, smear the ink into the right kind of old. You adjust your pace to the binder's apprentice slouch shoulders, a little forward chin, a little down the posture of someone who's memorized the weight of folios and the recipes for glue. Mainstream historical fact cities used shibboleth's verbal or physical tells to sort locals from imposters. In 1302 at Bruges, the Flemish asked suspected French speakers to say Schild on Vrin. Those who couldn't shape the sounds paid for it. Similar tests occur in chronicles from Sicily, from the Rhineland, even in border markets where one wrong vowel meant you'd be invited to a conversation you didn't plan on having. Clothing did it too. Sumptuary laws taught people to read class at a glance, and trades marked bodies. Rope walkers smelled of tar, scribes of ink fullers, of stale urine and soap. slip the scent, trip the test. You've passed these tests so long, your body does the steps on its own. Which is why the first real wobble feels theatrical. A woman in teal with a bundle of cloth blocks the alley, and you do the binder's polite sidestep. She moves the same way. You mirror again. She mirrors back. Comedy, then sudden stillness. She's not trying to pass. She's drawing you. Her sleeve rides up. You see the underside marked faintly with a hare's ear scratched in thread. She whispers, "Southgate Wood." You keep your eyes on the folder. Ink doesn't travel, you murmur, which is a refusal the network knows how to hear, "Not me, not now." She lets you go. The pigeons decide your shoes might be bred and give chase for 2 steps, then lose interest when your boots refuse to be edible. At the binder's lane, a man you don't know but know about stands with one hand in his belt. Mud on his boots. No dust at the hem. He's the kind of careful that hopes you won't notice how careful. "Errand lad," he says with the indulgence of someone who loves playing uncle. You do your shrug line. He nods toward the folder. "Let's see. If you were in fact a scribe's boy, you'd grumble and obey. You grumble and move as if to obey, then fumble just enough that the vellum tilts and a wind you can't possibly control catches the top sheet and sails it perfectly under a barrel. You crouch with the weary grace of the put-upon, push the sheet back with 2 fingers and leave a thumbprint you mean to leave. It looks bored. That small performance buys you the right to say binder down the lane 3rd door and be waved past. It would have worked your little theater of clumsiness if not for the second watcher who loves shoes. You feel his gaze roll over your latchets and stop. Dock hands tie left over right. Monastery boys tie right over left. Binders who don't want their laces dipping into paste tuck ends under twice. You tucked once. The watcher looks at your feet, then at your hands. His mouth pinches. Your story unravels there at a knot the size of a thumb. Quirky tidbit shoemakers could read you like a margin note your heel wear said how you stood. Your ties betrayed what work caught you mid-task. Some guilds joked they could spot an imposter by knots alone. Historians still argue whether such occupational tells were deliberately taught as internal passwords, or just became folklore that spy catchers pretended to master after the fact. You feel the change in the air the way rooms do when someone switches a candle for a mirror. The mudboot uncle says too loudly. You're late, which is not a scold. It's a hook to pull attention. You answer in that same volume binder kept me to make the hook look like a friendly one. A notary with a feathered hat, of course, turns and smiles like a knife sharpened on flattery. He has a scrap of parchment in his hand, clean as a sin before breakfast. Boy, he says, take this to the guild hall on your way, and this is where your cover story snaps. A real runner would reach. You do not because your palm has learned to do sums faster than your mouth. He sees the math in the stutter. "Ah," he says, as if surprised, not pleased. You pivot to boredom, the cloak you wear when fright isn't useful. Lunch first, you say, bland. He smiles wider, a man who loves an audience even without a stage. "Let me buy it." He purrs and gestures toward the square. You walk because you can't run without admitting what you are. The onion preacher is there, which helps your heart. She sees your shoulders and says loudly, "Your posture is an insult to gravity," the way she says it to boys, who think spines are optional. You straighten in relief, which is also code. Willem materializes near a hoop like punctuation again. The apple woman mint between fingers tilts her head the way a saint might if saints preferred gossip. The feather guides you to a bench and buys bread with a flourish that makes a minor sacrament of wheat. He sets a cup of ale in front of you, just far enough that you must reach for it. A ring glints inside the cup's shadow copper hair, perhaps. Perhaps not. You pretend the cup is a bell and don't ring it. You're a clever boy, he says. I like clever boys. He's not talking to you. He's talking to the crowd in consensus-building tones. You are being framed as charming. It will make the turn more satisfying later. This is where you do the thing you've built covers to avoid. You pick one with your hands and make it breathe. Copy boy, you say too loud to the onion preacher. He thinks I'm a copy boy. She catches the bit so quickly you could cry from gratitude. Then read, she snaps, flipping your folder open, as if you were in fact hers to scold. You recite a psalm you know you've seen on a dozen vellum scraps in a dozen rooms. You keep your voice steady, slow, soporific. An ASMR psalm for the suspicious. The feather waits for you to trip. You don't, because prayer is just breathing with punctuation, and you've trained both. He shifts tactics. Pronounce scales. He says lightly, a shibboleth aimed at your tongue. You say at the town, way hard S. He tries a border word, say, butter. You flatten the vowels like a man from the North Market. He goes for the jugular, say, guild. You say guild. Of course you do. You've been saying it in your sleep for weeks. The notary's smile fades a step. He wasn't expecting competence to be so uncooperative. He reaches for drama. Show us your hands, he commands, and you do palms up, ink, old soot, new a nick that belongs to rope. He tuts like a disappointed tutor. Rope burn, he says. Weighing apples, the onion preacher snorts. Strong boys weigh honest measures, she says, and the crowd laughs on cue. You could propose to that woman with a single mint sprig. Mainstream historical fact again, public theater was a tool of policing. Crowds weren't just witnesses, they were instruments. Shame displays and show questions measured not only the accused, but the audience who sided, who smirked, who folded arms where they didn't belong. Town watch manuals remind sergeants to employ neighbors for the proving, which is tidy Latin for weaponize the street. The feather shifts to private voice. You've had a busy week, he murmurs, with hills and ropes and rings that don't belong to you. You can keep your clever if you give me someone else's. He lays a name like a coin, the candlemaker's, of course. He always liked ink. You answer with furniture. Bench is hard, you say deadpan. He blinks. You give him nothing softer than wood. He lays down his next card. Or we walk to the hall and you dance a rope until your memory improves. Your breath tries to be a hunted thing. You tell it a bedtime story, instead 4 and 6 out. Rope's music is off today, you say low. He hates whimsy. The unraveling arrives from your shoes, which is how you'll remember this forever. The notary glances down, triumphant binders boys, tuck twice. The line is bait. The crowd takes it because it's tidy and explainable, and makes them feel like they too can read the city with their eyes. You don't explain your choices to crowds or to men with feathers. You stand slow, and your folder falls open. A sheet slithers out, sliding to the cobbles like a paper fish. The onion preacher steps on it without looking, as if paper, unlike onions, is beneath her moral notice. The feather reaches. She doesn't move. Slippery, she says, testy. He doesn't instruct a woman with knives for eyes to move. He's not brave, just adorned. In the beat that causes Willem coughs behind you, one long, two short, the same punctuation he gave you at the alley yesterday, left now. You pivot left. The crowd closes. Not to save you, crowds don't love you that much, but to watch more comfortably. In their reordering, a ladder appears, where it wasn't a breath ago. Barrelman's trick leaned just so against the Guildhall's side. You take 2 rungs because your legs have a PhD in getting you out of places you weren't supposed to be in, and because the feather pauses just long enough to smirk at how clever he is for trapping you in public. Clever people lose time to their own mirrors. You don't run. You remove yourself in the polite way ducks pass under bridges. One moment, you're there. The next moment, you're a roomer who owes a baker's boy 2 coppers. Across the low roof over the lintel that shoulders the crier's loop into a courtyard where laundry says nothing. You drop into the brewer's side yard because tables owe you favors. The spice seller's daughter is there, of course, because the world keeps sending you the same 5 saints in different capes. She doesn't ask. She hands you a cloak that smells like last night's mash. You become a brewery worker in one motion, shoulders down, chin up too much to carry to care about feathers. Back in the square, the feather declares a search with the flair of a man who practices pronouns in front of a window. We, he says, as if the town is his choir. The onion preacher sells an onion at a discount to someone who didn't ask for one, which is her way of changing topics. Historians still argue whether most captures in your century were the result of brilliant detective work or sloppy luck, wrong knot, wrong boot, wrong friend at the wrong window. Your day says, this covers unravel at edges you forget to iron, and sometimes they hold because a woman stepped on a page like it was a beetle. You walk the back lanes with mash cloak and psalm voice, and a heart that has decided it will be a drum only when asked politely. You pass the church and avoid the fresco with the coated fish. Today is not a day to look pious near paint. You duck under the laundry that knows your height better than you do. You pause at Elska's safe house, don't knock, and hear her door breathe contentment. Joke 1, you consider opening a school where you teach how not to be interesting and imagine it would sell out by noon. At home, you sit and lay out the pieces, the shoes, the boys humming, the teal messenger's thread, the feather's hunger, the ladder that appeared like grammar. You write in the ledger, cover tested by tongue toes and theater. Survived by mint bench and barrel logic. Under it, because you're honest with pages in a way you can't be with rooms, tie twice next time. You count breath until your ribs forgive you. You tuck the hair rings face down. You set a mint sprig in the cup like a flag planted on a small island called now. You decide not to be brave for exactly 7 minutes. Then you get up, because the double agent's tightrope waits, and it doesn't care how your shoes are tied as long as you keep your feet. Joke 2, you write a note to yourself, buy new laces, retire old lies. Joke 3, you add, and maybe let the onion preacher pick your shoes. Night is when the tightrope feels thinnest. The city sleeps like a cat, half dreaming, one ear still tuned to the street. You walk it anyway because the signal has to go tonight or it won't matter by morning. No moon. Good for you, bad for anyone who likes to see their own shoes. The cobbles are damp enough to shine under lanterns, and somewhere a dog is taking its guard duties as a personal insult. You're dressed in the middle again, plain enough to be ignored, not so poor that people wonder why you're out. A small sack at your hip bumps gently as you walk. Inside, folded parchment wax, already cooling around the edge so it can be sealed in seconds. 2 rings you shouldn't have. 1 smooth pebble that's not for throwing, but for reminding yourself which pocket the real thing is in. The meeting place tonight is a workshop, which is what you call a cellar when it's too damp to be a pantry. It sits under a cooper's shop and smells exactly like a place that makes barrels should smell oak shavings pitch and the faint musk of river transport. If you were here for actual work, you'd be thinking about hoops and staves. You're here for what's under them. Mainstream historical fact in busy port towns, coopers were vital. Their workshops were social hubs for dockside labor merchants and unofficially people with news that needed moving without a clerk's nose in it. Written mentions of meetings in the Cooper's underhouse usually mean political plotting or illicit trade. Some guild charters even warn members against improper gathering in these spaces. The Cooper is a friend of friends, broad shoulders, slow walk, the kind of man who speaks in hum more than words. He lets you in with a grunt, drops the trapdoor behind you, and immediately goes back to planing a stave as if you were a delivery of nails he's not in a hurry to unpack. You take the ladder down to the cellar. Two others are already there, a silk dyer you know only as Mara and the tinker you've avoided since he tried to sell you a reversible lockpick that required an entire book's worth of instructions. They're hunched over a barrel head on the floor, using it as a table. A candle drips onto the wood in slow punctuation. Mara gestures you over. On the barrel head, a map of the North Quarter sketched in charcoal with 3 spots marked in red. Patrol routes, she says. One of ours, one of theirs, one nobody admits to. The nobody admits to route is the problem: midnight patrols that pop up without schedule, cutting across alleys you normally use like a private road. They've already tangled 2 couriers this week, and the second one hasn't come back. You pull the parchment from your sack. Message goes out through the west side, you say. If the third route's out, we lose an hour. Tinker scratches his chin. Unless we make them see something they'd rather follow than us. Quirky tidbits: some spies and smugglers in medieval cities use deliberate distractions. Goats with bells, staged brawls, even wandering minstrels paid to linger at certain corners to draw watchmen away from key paths. In one Hanseatic port, bakers supposedly baked alarm bread with extra yeast so it puffed comically high. A cart accidentally spilled it in the market, and the spectacle was enough to clear a street for 10 minutes. Historians still argue whether that story's more bakery myth than tradecraft. Tonight's version will be simpler: a barrel accidentally bursting its hoops in the middle of a patrol street, scattering staves and making enough noise to interest any watchman within a bowshot. The Cooper upstairs will stage it loudly, and that will give you a window. The map folded, you head out first. The plan's no good if you're all seen together. You take the narrow lane along the Tanner's Row, worse smell, fewer questions. The moon's still sulking somewhere behind clouds. Your boots click softly until they meet the market square's churned mud. Then it's just your breathing and the distant rumble of a cart. Halfway to the gate, you hear the signal, 3 rapid bangs of wood on stone, the Cooper's hammer pretending to miss its mark. A shout follows, then a satisfying crack as the barrel bursts. You slip into the alley just as a pair of watchmen jog past, muttering about drunk Coopers and waste of good oak. Your path is clear. You keep walking pace, even head down sack, bumping like any errand's load. At the west gate, the porter doesn't even glance up. He's elbow deep in a game of dice with a carter. You murmur the night's password as you pass Black Sail. He responds without looking, White Wake. Beyond the gate, the road's quieter. You cut across to the shadow of the old wall, following it until the stones give way to brambles. There's a gap here, low and narrow, where a missing block makes a space just wide enough for you to slide through sideways. On the other side, a patch of grass and a rock outcrop. You kneel, feel along the base until your fingers find the hollow and slip the parchment inside. You replace the stone brush, away the scuff your boot left. From here, someone else will take it, someone you'll never meet, moving in the other direction toward the next link in the chain. Joke 1, you imagine the message going all the way to the coast in a single night, then getting stuck because someone's ferry goat refuses to board without its favorite barrel. The way back is slower. The watch will be circling after their Cooper incident, and you don't want to meet them sweaty. You take the long detour through the weaver's yard where loom songs murmur behind shutters and the air smells of wet wool. When you reach the market again, the burst barrel is still there, half its staves leaning drunkenly against a wall. The Cooper's wiping his brow with a rag, muttering about weak hoops to anyone who'll listen. You pass him a coin, as if for ale. He passes you the faintest nod. Mainstream historical fact, again in urban espionage, cover operations like the Cooper's staged accident were as valuable as the actual message work. They created plausible explanations for movement sound and odd behavior. Without them, the smallest irregularity could unravel an entire network. You're halfway home when you hear steps behind you, light but too steady to be random. You keep walking until the lane narrows between two shuttered bakeries. Then you stop, turn, and wait. A boy steps into the lantern's spill. Not the roof boy, smaller eyes, wider clothes, 2 winters too short. He holds out a folded scrap. You take it, unfold it under the light. One word, charcoal smudged, change. Joke 2, you briefly hope it means coins because you're short on bread money. It doesn't. It means the network's codes will be shifting tonight. Names, signs, meeting spots, all different by sunrise. Someone's rattled or someone's been rattled on. You tuck the scrap into your sleeve. Tell them I got it, you say. The boy nods, once vanishes into the dark like a pebble into water. The walk home feels different now, every corner a little sharper, every doorway a little more curious. You pass the safe house, see Elsky's yarn braid in the window instead of the eave. 2 knots. She's open for the right kind of trouble, but tonight's trouble has a shifting face. At your own door, you pause. You leave the sack inside, lean your head briefly against the wood, and let the damp smell of the market fade from your nose. You think about the message in the wall, the boy in the lane, the sound of the Cooper's hammer calling the watch like a bell calls monks. You think about how thin the tightrope really is. Joke 3, you consider writing "buy goat" in the ledger just to see if anyone down the line can resist turning it into a mission. You light 1 candle low enough to barely reach the walls. The room smells of mint from the sprig you left earlier. You write in the ledger, barrel bought time. Message set. Change coming. Then you close it, blow out the candle, and let the city hum beyond your window while you listen for a step that shouldn't be there. Morning starts before the bell today, not because you're eager, but because the bell's gone silent. That's how you know something's already wrong. The cathedral's chime has been a constant for as long as you've lived here, even when the tower was under repair. No bell means either the ringer's ill, the ropes are cut, or someone doesn't want the quarter to keep time. You pull on your cloak and step into a street that feels unfinished, as if dawn got distracted. People are already whispering at doorsteps. A fishmonger hauling crates mutters about a missing clapper, and an old man swears he saw 2 figures in the tower last night, one of them carrying a sack big enough to fit a bronze tongue. Mainstream historical fact, church bells in medieval towns were more than markers of the hours they signaled markets, curfews, fires, and even enemy approach. Damaging or silencing a bell was a serious offense, often treated as sabotage against the whole community. In some cities, bell towers doubled as watchtowers, which made them tempting targets for anyone who wanted the watch blind. You head toward the square, knowing that no bell means no official time. And in a city like yours, that means patrol shifts will be off, meeting schedules will be fuzzy, and a spy who knows the real hour can move like a ghost. At the fountain, Willem is there, drinking from a chipped mug, eyes scanning more than they sip. Tower's been quiet since before first light, he says. Reeves blaming loose pins, but the sacristan's white as milk. Something's up top. You glance toward the tower. The ladders down the doors barred from inside. 2 guards stand at the base, trying not to look like they've been told to keep people out without knowing why. Quirky tidbit, some bells were inscribed with charms or saints' names, believed to protect the town not just from storms or fires, but from evil spirits. In a few chronicles, thieves who stole such bells were said to be cursed until they returned them. Though historians still argue whether those curses were more social pressure than supernatural punishment. You take the long route around the square, stopping at the baker's stall. Bread's already selling fast. No bell meant no official start to market, so everyone came early. That chaos is your opening. You buy a loaf, pass the coin, and use the lean across the counter to scan the tower's side. They're halfway up a narrow window, with the shutter cracked, just enough to see a flicker of movement. Mara appears beside you like she's been standing there all along. "North gate's shut tight this morning," she says quietly. "Someone's using the tower for their own bell." Meaning, you ask. Meaning messages by rope and pulley instead of sound. Up there you can see the roads clear to the ridge, and no one will question why a rope's moving in a bell tower. You chew the bread like it's an ordinary morning. You want the top. She shakes her head. "You're better on ladders. I'm better in crowds. I'll keep the base noisy." So you head to the Cooper's Alley, where the roofline almost brushes the tower's buttress. From there, it's a short climb to the lower ledge, and then a careful slide along stone cold enough to bite your palms. The narrow window is just wide enough to hook your fingers and pull yourself inside. The smell hits first oil from the pulley damp rope, and a faint tang of wax, sealing wax, still warm. The bell's clapper lies on the floor wrapped in canvas, and at the far end, a man in a gray jerkin is feeding parchment into a small leather tube, tying it to the rope where the clapper should hang. Mainstream historical fact again, some siege and trade messages in the Middle Ages traveled by weighted cords over high vantage points, often from tower to tower. They were quick, hard to intercept without being seen, and could carry anything from troop counts to coded trade agreements. The man hasn't seen you yet. You step onto the beam beside the bell balance like a cat, because there's nowhere else to put your feet. Not the usual sermon, you say lightly. He startles, drops the tube. It swings from the rope, thumping against the bell's curve. "You, how did you?" He's already looking for a weapon, but the only thing near him is a small hammer for tightening pins. You grab the rope, pull it toward you, and untie the tube before he can cross the space between. Inside, a single strip of vellum marked with 4 inked squares and 2 circles. Not words code, and one you don't recognize. Joke one, you half expect it to be a medieval shopping list, bread, onions, goats, and etc. The man lunges, but the beam wobbles under him. He curses, grabs for the bell frame, and in that moment you've already swung down the rope to the floor. You land on the clapper's canvas, grab it by instinct, heavy, awkward, and wedge it in the doorway. Without it, he can't leave fast unless he wants to explain why the bell parts are outside the tower. From below, you hear Mara's voice rise in a laugh that's meant to gather ears. A cheer follows. Perfect. She's turned the base into a distraction carnival. You pocket the tube slide out the window the way you came and take the Cooper's roof back to the alley. By the time the guards notice you, you're already another face in the market. Quirky tidbit, again, codes based on shapes, squares, circles, triangles were sometimes used in merchant tallies and architectural notes, as they were easy to draw and hard for the illiterate to misread. Historians still argue whether they were widely used for espionage or just appropriated from everyday trades for secrecy. At the safe house, Elski turns the vellum in her fingers. "Not ours," she says. "Not theirs either." She tilts it toward the window. Could be the third route. That chills you more than the climb. The third route patrols were bad enough if they're using their own tower code. They're more organized than you thought. Joke 2, you mutter that you liked it better when the bell only rang for weddings and fires. Elski wraps the code and tucks it under the false bottom of a bread bin. "We'll find someone who speaks circles and squares," she says. "Until then, keep to the shadows." The rest of the day moves strangely. Without the bell, the city feels unmoored. Meetings run late, merchants' close early guards show up where they're not expected. You use the confusion to make 2 small drops, a copper ring in the dyer's vat, a folded scrap under the cider press. But your mind keeps drifting to the tower, the rope, and the man who thought it was his to use. That night, as you pass the square, you hear the bell again, just once, low and slow. Someone's put the clapper back. The sound rolls over the rooftops like a held breath finally exhaled. Joke 3, you almost wave toward the tower, but decide the bell's not a friend who waves back. You go home with the echo still in your ears, wondering if tomorrow the city will feel anchored again, or if the real message's already gone farther than you can follow. Midnight is an hour that sharpens edges. Doors seem thinner, floors speak louder, and the city wears its own bones on the outside. You walk anyway, because keeping everything inside your skull feels louder than the street. The bell's single late note from earlier still hums somewhere behind your sternum. The memory of circles and squares and waxed vellum keeps rotating like a prayer wheel you never meant to spin. You turn down the lane that remembers the smell of soap, past Elsky's shutter, dark but not asleep, past the brewer's yard where mash breathes like an old dog, past the market's ghost, empty stalls, holding the shape of onions and apples in the dark. You aim yourself toward the only door that makes sense for what you're about to do, the one painted the color of tea left too long, the little side door of St. Mildred's, the church that never quite learned how to lock pride out or charity in. You don't knock, you press the latch and slip into a nave that smells of beeswax and cool stone. One lamp in the chancel burns the way lamps do when nobody is sure who's paying for the oil. The priest, thin as a quill and just as much ink on his cuffs, sits under the rood beam with a book closed on his knee. He looks up as if midnight were his usual visiting hour. It probably is. I'm not here to be pious, you say, because you're more dangerous to yourself when you pretend otherwise. I'm here to tell one person the truth. He nods like you've ordered exactly what the house serves. He gestures to the side chapel with the thin screen wood lattice carving vines that never existed with a stool tucked behind it. You don't need a screen, not really. You prefer the honesty of faces. But tonight you want to practice saying things in a smaller voice to someone who won't take notes. You sit. He doesn't clear his throat. He doesn't ask for a format. He just waits, and the waiting is the gentle kind of pressure that always makes you talk. You start with the easy lies: I carry messages because I can walk fast and keep my mouth shut. Then you open the bag of harder ones you've kept closed for months. You tell him about the hair rings face down on your table like guilty coins, about the beacon smoke you starved into wisdom, about the onion preacher's way of turning a crowd into a shield with nothing but grammar, about the feather that keeps turning up in rooms that think they're locked, about the code that isn't yours or theirs, the circles and squares that looked like a child's chalk game and made your stomach cold anyway. You even tell him about the drowned night tune, though you don't say how often it has saved your lungs. That one feels like giving away a key. Mainstream historical fact drifts in with the lamp's soft hiss by the High Middle Ages sacramental confession. The seal of the confessional was considered inviolable in much of Latin Christendom. Priests were forbidden on pain of deposition, or worse, to reveal what penitents said. Parishioners shrived before Easter. Shrove Tuesday took its name from those pre-Lent confessions. The practice made churches into strange vaults where words were deposited and never withdrawn, even when the watch knocked politely and then impolitely. You don't ask him for absolution. That's not what you came for. You ask him for an answer to a smaller question with bigger teeth. If I put one name on a piece of paper tomorrow, a woman who sells onions will live longer. If I put a different name, a boy on a roof will. If I put no names, the hare puts their own in a ledger beside done and sleeps fine. How do I choose? He looks at the lamp. The church has nothing useful to say about hares, he says, and it almost sounds like a joke. Then he quotes something that isn't a psalm, choose the door that keeps most doors open. He doesn't mean it as poetry. He means preserve the web. Save the one who keeps three others safe. Rescue the hinge and wood can be replaced. You tell him about Elsky's door that isn't a door, the bread bin dropped the reed tube that will carry whispers under the eave. About the cooper's staged barrel and the way a city can be guided with farce when force would get everyone killed. About the surveyor pulled from a kiln, because lines on maps are just fancy names for people's feet. About the boy who slid a scrap into your hand that said change and made your shelves tilt under codes that keep moving. He listens without blinking, the way men do when they've learned that blinking is a luxury someone else pays for. He doesn't ask who. He doesn't ask when. He asks the one question that sounds like it belongs in a church and a spy's ledger at once. What won't you do? You've avoided the list. You make it now out loud. You won't hand a neighbor to a rope for convenience. You won't choose fire when smoke can warn enough. You won't turn a crowd into a weapon unless laughter is the only cut. You won't pretend that bribes are a sacrament even if they keep someone breathing till morning. You won't make a door in a house that can't afford to lose one. You won't make the boy on the roof hum for no reason. Quirky tidbit slides in on the back of memory. Some parishes used shriving pennies, tiny alms given after confession, sometimes kept as tokens. A few folk wore them as luck against storms and lawsuits, more superstition than theology. In pockets of the north, penitents carried hazelnuts or pebbles to the priest, each one a misdeed counted and then discarded into a bowl when forgiven. Historians still argue whether those tokens were widespread practice or just local comfort for neighbors who preferred to hold their guilt in a hand before letting it go. I'm not here for a token, you say. I'm here to say it out loud once so I can stop saying it when they ask me wrong. He smiles with only his eyes. Then say the part you've kept back. You exhale slow like you're teaching your ribs their letters again. I am tired of being clever, you say. I want one thing that isn't a trick. Silence, but the kind that tastes like water. I have one favor to ask you, Ad. If they bring me to your hall with their rope and their papers, don't speak my name in public. Speak for Elske instead. Speak for the onion preacher, even if she scolds you for it afterwards. Speak for the boy on the roof. I'm furniture. They'll break me either way. Keep the room. He doesn't make promises he can't keep. He says I will spend what credibility I have on doors, not on chairs. You close your eyes and let your spine rest on the idea that your body is a bench in a room where words are heavier than hands. He gives you, instead of a penance, a practical. Write a letter that tells the truth to someone who can burn it. Not to exonerate you, to anchor you. You nod because that's a recipe you can follow. You picture the candle maker's hand, the way his ink dries like a plan he hasn't shared yet. You think of Mara's smudged thumb on a soot cone, Willem's hoop knock at a corner, the apple woman's green sword of comfort. A network is a prayer chain with better maps. You stand. He doesn't bless you, which feels like respect. You leave 2 coins on the rail with no noise and slide back into the night that isn't pretending to be anything else. Outside, the air is cold enough to make breath look like speech, and for once you let it. You walk south first, then loop north because you've learned to confuse anyone who falls in love with your routines. The city is very lightly awake, 1 cat, 2 lovers, a notary's candle doing overtime, a watchman who nods as if you share a joke about how small hours pay poorly and charge dearly. You don't go home. You go to the weaver's yard, where the loom song is the loudest thing at this hour. Inside, the widow who keeps the night watch blinks at you once, and then at the quill in your fingers. You ask for a scrap. She tears you a piece from a bolt of waste linen with the tenderness of a midwife. You write on it in the candlemaker's ink, not in circles or squares, not in hair marks or psalm cuts, but in the oldest cipher you know, plain words. You write, if tomorrow they ask for a name, use mine to buy Elska 2 months, and the onion preacher a week. If there is a third name to save, make it the boy who hums. The hair is a knife. Don't argue with it. Stall it. Smoke, not fire. Doors first. I am tired, but I am not finished. You fold it twice. You don't sign? You draw a mint leaf badly because you're not an artist, and because she will know. You carry it to a door that isn't supposed to be yours, the brewer's back, where a dead drop waits under a loose brick. You slide the note in and replace the brick with the careful pressure of a man who has put too many words into too many walls. On the way back, you stop by Elska's and hang the red braid on the chair 2 knots, and then a third small one that means gone for a while on purpose. It's not in the manual. There is no manual. You write as you go. Willem appears from a darkness that thinks it's clever. He doesn't ask what you confessed, because Willem saves questions for when he needs to push a barrel somewhere narrow. He holds up 2 fingers, his shorthand for you good. You answer with your shoulder, and a wry tilt that means as good as midnight gives. Joke 1, you consider telling him you confessed to stealing 2 apples and an entire political situation, but you let that one be a private laugh. Joke 2, you realize you have in fact become the kind of person who prays for better scheduling. Joke 3, you promise yourself a sinfully long nap if the bell rings on time tomorrow, knowing full well that's not how any of this works. Before turning toward your own street, you detour to the square. The onion preacher's canopy is folded, but her scale sits under it like a sentinel. You press your palm to its pan just enough to feel the tilt. It's not profound. It's just honest metal telling you how weight works. You whisper because you're allowed to, at midnight, keep me even. Historians still argue whether priests kept espionage secrets more faithfully than lay neighbors when the watch pressed them, whether the seal of the confessional held under civic heat, or whether in practice everyone's duty to the peace made leaks inevitable. They argue too whether midnight confessions like yours were more about God or about the only unlocked ear in town. You don't have time to referee. You have doors to open and keep closed, sometimes both with the same hand. In your room, you don't light the lamp. You can find the ledger by memory now. You run your fingers over its cover and then decide not to write. Not tonight. You take the hair rings and leave them face down because that's honest enough for now. You set a mint sprig in a cup and let it say anything that needs saying. You lie back and count breath, not because you're calm, but because you've learned that bodies obey math when souls are busy. Tomorrow is the market and the bell, the tower and the rope, the feather and the broom, the boy and the roof, the code that isn't yours, the door that is. Tonight was one truth spoken to one person who cannot sell it for a coin. You try to let that make a difference. It does for the length of a candle you didn't light. Dawn arrives with a sound you've been half dreaming all night, the bell striking clean and unhurried, as if it had never missed a note in its life. You're not sure whether to be relieved or suspicious, so you settle on both. You walk to the square in the thin light cloak, still carrying the smell of mint from last night. People are already gathering, partly for market, partly to stare at the tower and reassure themselves that time has returned to its proper cage. Willem's leaning against the fountain, barrel free, but still looking like a man who could roll one into trouble at a moment's notice. He tips his chin toward the tower. Ringer swears nothing happened, he says, which means something happened. Mainstream historical fact, medieval bell ringers, were often sworn to the church or the town and could be punished for negligence or deceit about their duties. Bells were civic property, and their misuse, even for harmless pranks, was treated as a breach of public trust. You glance at the door to the tower. It's unbarred now, but the guard posted beside it looks newly assigned and not entirely briefed. His eyes keep drifting toward the bakery, which is the opposite direction from anything dangerous. The plan for today is not grand. Grand plans tend to leave you broke or breathless. You just need to confirm whether the bell's return means the coded rope trick is finished, or whether someone has simply learned to hide it better. You take the long way to the market, cutting behind the onion preacher's stall. She's already weighing a pile of shallots, muttering a sermon to the copper scale. Even the lightest thing tips if you wait long enough, she says to no one in particular. You drop a coin in her basket. Seen any strange faces? She narrows her eyes. Only yours before breakfast. Then softer, a man with circles tattooed on his knuckles bought 6 onions and left without change. Quirky tidbit tattoos in medieval Europe were rare outside certain trades and pilgrim cultures. Some merchants, however, marked themselves with symbols tied to guilds or cargo marks, visible only to those who knew what they meant. Historians still argue whether such marks were widely used for covert identification or were simply personal superstition. Circles on knuckles make your skin itch in memory of the vellum code. You thank her and keep walking, weaving between stalls until you see him gray jerkin hood, back holding a cloth-wrapped bundle under one arm. Not the man from the tower, short or broader, but the tattoos match. You follow at a market pace, never closer than 2 stalls. He pauses to buy a wedge of cheese, tucks it into the same bundle. He doesn't glance back once, which is either confidence or carelessness. The path he takes loops toward the weaver's yard, then angles suddenly toward the north gate. There, at a cart selling wool skeins, Mara is accidentally knocking over a basket tangling colors in a way that would take 10 minutes to fix. The tattooed man pauses to step around her, and that's when you close the gap enough to see the bundle's corner slip inside a short wooden tube capped with wax. Joke 1, you briefly hope it's a novelty flute because you could use music right now. It's not. It's a message container, same make as the one you took from the bell rope. You adjust your course so you're at his side as he passes through the gate. Outside, the road bends toward the ridge, toward Beacon Country. Mainstream historical fact, again, portable message tubes, often made of wood or horn, were common among messengers and clerks. They kept parchment dry and protected, and in wartime could be worn under a cloak to conceal their shape. He turns onto a narrow track clearly not meant for carts. You let him get ahead, then cut across the low meadow to intercept at a bend. When he comes around it, you're leaning against a fence post eating the bread you bought earlier. Ridge is windy this time of year, you say conversationally. He stops, one hand on the bundle. You from the town sometimes. You gesture at the bundle. That for the hairs or the circles, the flicker in his eyes is answer enough. He bolts. You don't chase, not directly. You cut across the slope using the sheep path that halves the distance to the beacon track. When you hit the path again, you're ahead of him. This time, you stand in the middle. He skids to a stop, glances at the meadow, calculates his odds. You point at the bundle. Let me see it, and you keep walking. He hesitates, then tosses it underhand. The cheese rolls free. The tube thuds into the grass. You pick it up, pop the wax seal, and slide out the parchment. Circles and squares, again, different pattern. You don't know the code, but you know enough to keep it from reaching the wrong hands. You roll it, slide it back, and toss the tube into the stream beside the path. The current takes it downstream in seconds. Joke 2, you imagine a fisherman pulling it up next week and deciding it's a very tiny, very disappointing net. He's already gone when you look up, vanished into the meadow. You walk back toward town tubeless, but with the pattern in your head. Quirky tidbit again, some codes used in espionage were designed to be memorized and destroyed, but others relied on physical diagrams, easy to alter, harder to remember without practice. Destroying the carrier could delay an operation by days or weeks. At the square, the bell strikes noon. The sound is clean, ordinary, the opposite of intrigue. But you can't unsee the rope in the tower or the knuckle tattoos or the way a message tube floats away when you stop holding it. Elska's braid in the window has one knot today. Safe for now. You breathe like someone who doesn't entirely believe it. Joke 3, you tell yourself that if you see another circle this week, it had better be on a pie. You walk home with the market noise fading behind you, wondering how many more patterns you'll have to intercept before you learn the language they're speaking. You spend the morning pretending you're not packing to leave. You tidy your table in the bored way of a person who expects to come back to it. You angle your ledger under the lamp as if it were a sunbather. You set the 2 hair rings face down and tell yourself that's just habit. It isn't. It's staging for an empty room. The message that will decide whether you return arrives as a loaf again, only the baker's wife doesn't hand it to you. A boy with windburned cheeks does, and he doesn't wait for thanks. Inside the bread wrapped in oiled linen sits a smaller twist of parchment, tough with wax and smelling faintly of river pitch. You open it with a care that borders on superstition. 4 lines each, clear enough to be carved into the side of a church. Hare convenes at dusk beyond North Ridge. Ledger and seals required. Bring runner alone. There's a second slip beneath in the candlemaker's hand. We can't burn them all at once. We can scatter them. Ride. You know what ride means. It means put your body between the town and the thing that wants to reach for it. It means all the small lessons, rope breath market, boredom, mint for ribs, onions for courage, have to fit into a saddle and pretend they were always travel skills. Willem meets you at the stable, which you knew he would. He brings not a barrel, thank heaven, but 2 apples and a loop of rope tied into that truth hitch you invented for the hill keeper. For your wrist, he says, not to bind, to remember. You tie it there like a talisman that happens to know knots. Mainstream historical fact-mounted couriers were the nervous system of late medieval states and cities, royal posts on set roads, noble messengers with liveries, guild riders who moved contracts and coin, and the anonymous common carriers who moved everything else. Horses were swapped at posting houses where they existed. Where they didn't, a hard-used gelding and a bribe could make a road feel shorter. In some realms, the speed of a packet could be measured by how many candles had burned in the watchhouse window when it arrived. You leave by the west lane to be seen, and slip east by the tanners to be forgotten. Elska's chair knot shows 1 loop today. Her signal for doors are calm. The onion preacher lifts a scale pan in your direction. It tips, then settles. Bless her grammar. Mara saunters past with a coil of silk like it weighs nothing, and somehow with only her eyebrows convinces 2 watchmen to argue with each other about curfew. The roof boy is of course on a roof, humming exactly 3 notes of the drowned night tune and calling a gull rude names. You look up and he touches his cap, clear sky. At the gate, the clerk with mildew on his conscience tests your writ like he's sniffing a loaf for weevil. You let him because scrutiny is safer than favor. Past the wall, the road takes you like an old habit hedges, low fields, politely stubbled a ribbon of mud that remembers every hoof for a day and then decides to forget. Within the first mile, you pick up your shadow. The feathered nephew knows better than to wear the plume today, but swagger travels naked. He keeps his distance like a man who wants you to feel the story's edge brushing your ankles without quite cutting. Two more riders haunt the hedgerow brown cloaks with the posture of men who believe they invented noon. You smile without teeth. Of course they came. The invitation in the loaf was written to you and to them. The ridge appears not dramatic enough to justify all the legends, a wrinkle in the land, a scattering of hawthorns, the north beacon's hump peaking like a thoughtful knuckle. You keep to the low road until a hare darts across actual and impolite. You resist the urge to make it metaphor. Some hares are just hares. Joke one, you vow here and now to retire rabbits from your personal heraldry the moment you survive this. The meeting point is exactly wrong in the way a trap likes to be. Right, a stand of ash near a sheep pond. No houses within, a shout a track that can be watched from 3 angles. You don't ride into it. You circle wide through scrub slide from the saddle and lead the horse with your hand on his cheek to keep him honest. From a low rise you see them. 5 cloaks. No standards hares, prefer to be many and none. One man with shoulders like a carpenter and a scar, you could slot a coin into mud boots from the dye house, come to collect the debts he couldn't count. Beside him, a notary who loves feathers even on his days off hat, modest today, but smirk polished. A third with knuckle tattoos, circles that could be marks or prayers. 2 others with the deliberate stillness of men who like to hit first and talk if they must. A parcel sits at the center of their rough ring, wrapped in green waxed cloth. For show. Yours is in your saddlebag copy and truth nested like dolls. You step into view alone. The rope at your wrist feels like a hand you like more than you should. Brought what you asked, you say in that ASMR calm that has walked you through worse rooms. Brought it just the way your note ordered. The feather smiles like a shelf of knives. Excellent, he says, as if you'd met for bread. And brought your reputation, I hope. He tips his head toward the cloaks behind him. They want to meet it. You don't look at their parcel again. We trade here, you say. No riders on the flanks, no beacon smoke tricks. You let the word smoke hang heavy with the day you starved one into wisdom. The notary's mouth ticks. He did not enjoy that story when it traveled. He gestures. A brown cloak steps forward with a leather tube. The circles and squares code is rolled inside. You don't need to open it to know it by weight. You hold up your own, your copy of their ledger pages, their bribe list in someone's tidy hand. Their hair rings sketched, life-size, your counterfeit seal stamped for irony. The wind is just enough to make the edges flicker. The road mutters under the horse's hoof. Somewhere far off, a bell tolls late for noon because time is a suggestion in your city now. The exchange is simultaneously simple and dangerous. 2 steps, 2 hands, an instant, where everyone can decide to stop pretending. They decide first. Mud Boots moves not toward the packet, but toward your wrist. He grabs for the rope as if to own your talisman and your hand in a single motion. You let him take it because you didn't tie it to you. You tied it to the horse's breast strap, and when he yanks the gelding surges with the offended dignity of an animal who does not enjoy being turned into a lesson. Mudboot stumbles. The circle knuckles reaches, and you let the tube drop into the scrub. He dives predictable, bless him. The notary lunges toward your copy just as you do the thing you promised yourself you wouldn't. You whistle the drowned night line. Not loud, just enough for the roof boy on the far ridge. You see him now, tiny as a thumb, to answer with his own 3 notes. For this once you call the choir. From the south hedgerow, the brewer's cart appears at the speed of late for deliveries. From the east, 2 guild sergeants who hate feathers more than they hate you arrive, acting as if this is about tariffs. From the west, the spice seller's daughter walks as if she's going nowhere important. and knocks the parcel into the pond when 3 circling sheep protest the noise. The hair parcel soaks like any other bad idea. The notary swears in a way your ASMR contract doesn't allow on air, which is almost worth the ride. Mud Boots recovers with ugly grace and reaches for your shoulder. You shift market stall posture, and he grapples fresh air and a joke. You plant your feet like you're peeling onions. He meets the part of your hip that learned the wheelbarrow's lesson and decides to sit. The circle knuckles man lunges for the tube again. You let him have it, because that one holds yesterday's pattern, which the candle maker already taught you how to break. The fresh pattern, the one written since the bell, sits inside your boot, ink drying against leather. Nobody likes boots until they do. Mainstream historical fact slips a note into your palm as the square's chorus becomes a country chorus. Medieval ambushes often turned on the geography of hedges and ditches more than on swords, roadside banks, as ramparts, carts, as moving walls, pawns, as a weapon no one thought to sharpen. We remember charges. The records show a lot of tripping. You don't stay to savor your clever. Clever is the slowest flavor in a fight. You step back, whistle once more, and the brewer's cart, its axle chalked, because why not count your communions, rolls into the path of a cloak who thought speed would outrun choreography. The guild sergeants practice their favorite pastime, lawful obstruction, and the feather makes the decision his lineage bred into him retreat with the story that favors him instead of winning the day that won't. He will tell someone he nearly had you. He will mean it. You ride. Not away from danger that's never the direction, but toward the ridge where sightlines can be persuaded to serve you. The roof boy's hand flashes left. You take the sheep path hidden like a joke. Behind pursuit gathers, then falters. The pond claims a boot. The cart explains physics to a knee. The last courier's ride isn't winning. It's bleeding time out of a day until the enemy's plan misses its own appointment. You cross the saddle below the beacon. The watchman coughs a greeting he owes you. You toss him a coin, he'll deny. You swing down at the old wall where a missing stone became your mailbox last week, and slide the real pattern into the hollow circles and squares, replaced by the only code everyone understands: names, and where to stand at dusk if you prefer not to be surrounded. Quirky tidbit: some couriers carried second letters sewn into their saddles or cloaks, dead faiths to be cut out if the first delivery fell apart. Others rubbed messages into the fabric with vinegar so words bloomed only over fire. Whether such precautions were common or story sweetening, historians still argue. Taylor's accounts hint at more creative notions of seam allowance than guild rules like to admit. You ride the long way home with the wind loud in your ears to drown out the part of your head that replays hands grabbing wrists and tubes thudding where they shouldn't. At the first view of the town, its patchwork of roofs, its bell modest, as if it had never misbehaved, you stop. You listen for tunes. The air is unhelpfully calm. At the north gate, the clerk raises his brows at your face like you're a paragraph he's read twice. You hand him a piece of stale bread from your bag. He laughs like a man who doesn't know he needed to. Inside the square is already arguing whether there was a fight at the ridge or merely an enthusiastic sheep incident. Good. Confusion is the mother of breathing. Willem leans a hoop against his shoulder and fails to look innocent. The onion preacher sells a shallot to a woman who will make soup for 3 neighbors because gossip needs a broth. The apple woman presses mint into your palm, and you would cry if it weren't extremely off-brand. You pass Elsky's house. The braid on the chair has 2 knots and a third small one gone for a while on purpose. You nod at the door's ambition. At the brewer's table, the girl slides you a cup that is mostly water and a little ale, and entirely mercy. The candlemaker appears with a thumb-stained circles and squares and says, "We'll need a new code by sunset." You say we needed it yesterday. He grins. Then it's on time. Historians still argue whether any of this, the beacons, the dead drops, the false seals, and true rings matters more than luck and weather and the fact that some men are too proud to share roads. You argue with your ribs that it does because your ribs learned the count underwater and on ladders and from ropes that wanted your attention. The count keeps you. The mint reminds you. The scale settles. You sit at your table at last and look at the ledger. You don't write a victory. You write a receipt Ridge paid. Pond took coin. Cart blocked story. Letter set in stone. Then you set the quill down like a weapon after a quarrel and let your hands be only hands for the length of a candle. Joke 2. You declare a personal holiday called Don't Chase Me Day. Then remember, you work in medieval espionage and laugh alone like a man who knows he'll still be chased tomorrow. Joke 3, you award yourself 2 apples, 1 for surviving, 1 for the horse who did most of the commuting. You let the ridge slide to the back of your mind until it's only a pale fold on the horizon. Nothing sharp, nothing asking. The bell that spent the day being an argument becomes just a slow, even heartbeat again, as dependable as your own breath when you give it permission to keep the steady count. In for a little, out for a little longer, shoulders easing as if someone who cares about you has a hand there. The square, so noisy in daylight, learns how to whisper. The onion preacher lays her scale down, and the pans kiss once then sleep. The brewer's yard breathes malt and warm wood. Willem's hoop is a circle without tasks, leaning contentedly like a moon that came home early. Even the roof boy chooses ground for an hour, the tiles remembering not to click while he rests. The mint on your sill sends up a small green thought, no sermon, no signal, just that easy leaf scent that says, "Here, breathe." If a memory tries to push through the rope, lifting a pawn's cold hand, a feathered smirk, you let it fade the way smoke fades when a window opens. You don't have to close anything with force. You open instead a little air, a longer exhale, a room that rearranges itself softly around quiet. The messages, the codes, the tiny tubes and chalk marks, they can all live on the table without climbing into the bed with you tonight. You can let doors be doors and not choices. Let gates be lines on a map and not a question of return. Let the horse of your mind stand unbridled in a safe field where nobody calls its name. Mint and wood and the low hum of a city that for once asks nothing from you until morning. So dim the lamp a fraction more. Smooth the blanket as if it were a page you're allowed to leave unfinished. And as your eyes drift, imagine a small, kind square where beacons practice patience, barrels roll only to the cellar, and the only signal the town needs is your breathing, even unhurried, and entirely its own. End of script. Sweet dreams.